Chapter 953. Lei Tingfeng's eyes flashed, but his heart was in turmoil. At this moment, the Shilin army had the absolute advantage. If they attacked, they would definitely be able to wipe out Marquis Nan and Murongshan's troops. But, if Emo Xiaoyao and Yili appeared here, would they not bring any reinforcements? Lei Tingfeng did not believe it. But if Emo Xiaoyao really did not bring any reinforcements, then he would have missed a great opportunity to avenge his humiliation. With all kinds of torment in his heart, Lei Tingfeng stared at Emo Xiaoyao, also in a dilemma. After a long time, he still did not dare to gamble. He sighed and said in a low voice, "I greet your Highness Prince Ding. I did not expect your Highness Prince Ding to arrive in time." Emo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Prince Lei, you flatter me. I was just lucky. If I could arrive before your Highness took Wei City, then it would be considered timely. Your Highness, now, are you planning to fight with I?" Lei Tingfeng forced a smile and said, "I admit that I am not Prince's opponent. Moreover, both sides are already very tired. Why not fight another day?" Emo Xiaoyao pondered for a moment, then finally nodded and said, "In that case, your Highness, please." Lei Tingfeng's face darkened. He nodded and said, "I will take my leave." Watching Lei Tingfeng leave with his army, Murongshan raised his eyebrows and said, "How many reinforcements did Prince Ding bring?" The current situation was very clear. Their troops were absolutely no match for Lei Tingfeng. For Lei Tingfeng to leave at this time, it was clear that he was afraid of Prince Ding's reinforcements. Emo Xiaoyao said lightly, "The reinforcements are still 100 miles away. I only brought a few people." That Lei Tingfeng. He thought that I brought a lot of people, but I lied to him that I didn't bring anyone. However, he really didn't bring anyone with him. Therefore, while it wasn't good for a general to be too impulsive, it wasn't good to be too cautious either. However, Lei Tingfeng's choice to leave at this time was not bad. Even though Emo Xiaoyao did not bring any troops with him, killing Lei Tingfeng in the midst of the chaos was still a simple task. Acropolis, Genom of Gojoseon's study room. Lei Tingfeng knelt on the ground in silence. Lei Zhenting concentrated on the booklet in his hand, as if he did not see the person kneeling on the ground. After a long time, Lei Zhenting finished reading the thick stack of booklets in his hands. Only then did he raise his head to glance at Lei Tingfeng and say, "Get up." Lei Tingfeng lowered his eyes and said, "Your son acted rashly and was greedy for merit. He almost fell into the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. Father, please punish me." "Punish?" Lei Zhenting sneered and said, "I only said a few words to you and you rushed to your death. How could I dare punish you?" Hearing Lei Zhenting's words, Lei Tingfeng felt even more ashamed. Your son knows his wrongs. However, you have to know that Prince Ding's achievements and abilities today are not only because he is a genius, but also because the hardships he has gone through are extraordinary. If not for that disaster 19 years ago, Emo Xiaoyao today might be a famous general of Dechu State, living a carefree life. However, father has never wished for you to experience that kind of disaster. Do you understand? Lei Tingfeng nodded. Son understands. Father has always protected son. Before he was 20 years old, he had truly lived a carefree life. It could be said that he was more honorable than the princes of Xiling. Emo Xiaoyao had fought on the battlefield when he was 14 or 15. He had been seriously injured when he was 17 or 18. He had struggled to support the large Prince Ding mansion. He had never experienced any of this. Therefore, he had no right to be jealous of Emo Xiaoyao's achievements and abilities. He could only feel ashamed of his own incompetence. Lei Zhenting sighed and said, "Perhaps father's protection has harmed you. However, even so, father still does not wish for you to experience that kind of pain and suffering. Moreover, Tingfeng, father has never been disappointed in you." "Father." Lei Tingfeng was stunned. Lei Zhenting smiled and said, "You are I's son. I think that you are already very good. Father, son understands." Lei Tingfeng lowered his eyes and hid the tears in his eyes. He said in a low voice, "Son will not disappoint father." Chapter 954. Lei Zhenting looked at his son in front of him with gratification. Although it was a little inappropriate for a man in his 30s to still have red eyes, this was the truest expression that Lei Tingfeng had shown in front of him in all these years. Walking in front of Lei Tingfeng, Lei Zhenting patted him on the shoulder and nodded. "Father believes that you will not disappoint me. Sit down and tell me about Imo Xiaoyao." Previously, Lei Zhenting was furious because of Lei Tingfeng's suicide, so he did not have time to discuss with him the sudden appearance of Imo Xiaoyao and the others. Lei Zhenting himself wasn't sure if protecting Lei Tingfeng all these years was a good thing for his son's future, but as a father, he couldn't force his son to go through some disasters that ordinary people couldn't bear just for the sake of his son's success. Lei Zhenting was obsessed with winning against the Prince Ding mansion and Imo Lufang, but he had never thought of forcing this obsession onto his son. Lei Tingfeng nodded and walked to the side to sit down. He recounted in detail how he saw Imo Xiaoyao on the battlefield. Hearing him finish, Lei Zhenting sighed slightly and said, "Tingfeng, you were deceived by Imo Xiaoyao, he did not have time to bring back the troops." Lei Tingfeng frowned. Lian Shan's eyes flashed with a trace of annoyance. Compared to Prince Ding, there was still a big difference. Lei Zhenting looked at him with a smile and said, "But you don't have to be sad. I am glad that you did not impulsively lead the troops to attack. Even if they destroyed Nanhou and Murongshan's Mahist army, it would only be a small victory. It could even be said that it would not affect the overall situation, but it would definitely not be able to hurt Imo Xiaoyao." However, in a fit of rage, Imo Xiaoyao could easily kill Lei Tingfeng. Such an exchange was not worth it for the Westhill and Jinan Palace. Lei Tingfeng looked at Lei Zhenting in confusion, but he quickly understood. With Imo Xiaoyao's martial arts, killing him was a simple matter. Looking at his father's smiling eyes, Lei Tingfeng lowered his head apologetically. "This son has made father worry." Lei Zhenting nodded in relief. Lei Tingfeng would not act impulsively in the future if he could think things through. As long as he could remain calm, with his ability, it would not be a problem for him to stay alive. "All right, it's good that you're all right. It was all thanks to you that we were able to take down Acropolis. Right now, both the Dechu State and Westhill are pressuring us. Our army has also taken down Ruichang and Acropolis. Right now, we still have the advantage," Lei Zhenting said. Lei Tingfeng nodded. "Father, are you worried about Imo Jingli? If our army can restrain Prince Ding and most of the generals of the Mahist army, Imo Jingli should be able to handle it." The Mahist army was indeed full of famous generals, but there were too many places that the Mahist army needed to defend. One of the original 3 generals of the Mahist army, Zhang Qilan, had been guarding the former emperor of Shiling's city to assist 4th young Master Su in governing Westhill. He could not return to participate in the war. Leng Huai also had to guard the Chu capital to deter the northerners from going back on their word. General Yuan Pei was already old. He could defend the city, but he did not have enough energy to mount a horse and kill the enemy. As a result, the Mahist army only had Marquis Nan, Lu Jingxian, Murong Shen, and a few others left. As for Yun Ting, Zhou Min, He Su, and a few other rising stars, their future might be bright, but at present, they might not be able to compete with the old generals of Westhill. After all, a genius like Imo Xiaoyao who could sweep through the various countries at the age of 10 was an anomaly even in the Prince Ding mansion. Lei Zhenting frowned. "Don't forget, there's still Yili," Lei Tingfeng raised his eyebrows. He had indeed forgotten about Yili, but this woman was the most unforgettable. Although she usually did not reveal her talents, her battle achievements were not inferior to any of the current famous generals. If she were to fight against Imo Jingli, it would be worrying whether Imo Jingli would win or lose. "Prince, a secret letter from the north has arrived." Outside the door, a guard reported in a low voice. Lei Zhenting's eyes darkened. He said indifferently, "Bring it to me." Since Imo Xiaoyao had returned, the situation in the north was no longer a secret. The guard pushed the door open, presented the letter, and retreated. Lei Zhenting opened the letter and read it. His expression changed. In the end, he just sighed and passed the letter to Lei Tingfeng. Lei Tingfeng took the letter and read it with some doubt. His expression suddenly changed. He said in horror, Mo Xiaoyao actually wiped out the entire Northern Tribe's army. Yelu Yi and Helian Zhen are both dead. Looking at the final battle between the Mahist army and the Northern Tribes, Lei Tingfeng's emotions were still very complicated even though the knot in his heart had been untied. To be honest, from Lei Tingfeng's point of view, he really could not see what was so special about this battle. It could be said that this was an extremely unusual night attack. However, it still managed to wipe out the Northern Tribe's army that had swept through the entire northern Dechu state 2 to 3 years ago. He raised his head to look at Lei Zhenting. Lei Zhenting stood in front of the map and pondered for a moment. Then, he pointed at a certain point on the map and asked, "Where is this place?" Huifeng Valley. Lei Zhenting said, "This is the place where the Mahist army was defeated 19 years ago. Not far from here is where Mo Xiaowen died." Lei Tingfeng was stunned. Chapter 955. Yes, I will remember your teachings. Feihong Pass. Because of the fall of the Acropolis, the Mahist army retreated to the front lines of Feihong Pass and Lingjiu Mountain. Old General Yuan Pei, who was stationed at Feihong Pass, was also very happy to see Prince Ding and Princess Consort. Although the old general was not afraid of dying on the battlefield, he knew that he was old and his energy was not as good as before. It would be even more difficult to defeat Genom of Gojoseon. Now that Prince Ding and Princess Consort had rushed back and saved millions of people in Feihong Pass from the disaster of war, the old general was naturally very happy. After welcoming Yi Li and the others into Feihong Pass and sitting down, Marquis Nan and Morongshan both knelt down and asked for forgiveness. "Prince, please punish us for the loss of the Acropolis." Mo Xiaoyao helped the two up with a smile and said, "There is no need to be like this. This battle was not your fault. If I had not delayed, how could the Acropolis have fallen? If that's the case, shouldn't this prince be punished first?" Marquis Nan quickly said, "Prince has his reasons for delaying. Prince naturally has his reasons. Losing Ruichang and the Acropolis is my fault for being useless." Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, "Marquis Nan and General Morong, there is no need to be like this. This matter is not your fault. If you had not tried your best to resist Lei Zhenting, I am afraid that I would not have had the time to wipe out the Northern Tribe's army so successfully. If you insist on asking for forgiveness, won't people say that I did not reward and punish you?" Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao really did not blame them, the two quickly thanked him. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "You two have worked hard these days. Sit down." General Yuan Pei, who was sitting on the side, could not hold back and quickly asked, Prince really wiped out the Northern Tribe's army?" Mo Xiaoyao nodded and smiled, "That's right." Feng Zhiyao, who was seated below, quickly recounted the events of the battle with the Northern Tribes with a smile. When old General Yuan Pei heard that the Northern Tribes' army had been completely annihilated, and that Helian Jin had been killed, tears streamed down his face as he repeatedly expressed his gratitude. Marquis Nan nodded and laughed, "Once this news is out, the morale of our Mahist army will definitely be boosted. Now that the Prince and Princess Consort are back, why should we fear the Xiling army?" Mo Xiaoyao nodded in satisfaction. "That's great." However, Mo Jingli had already led 800,000 Dechu state troops to the north. "I wonder which general is going to meet the enemy." The hall fell silent. A trace of hesitation flashed across Morongshan and Marquis Nan's faces. Even though they had already surrendered to the Mahist army, they were still once subjects of the Dechu state. Furthermore, no matter if it was the Mahist army soldiers or the Dechu state soldiers, they were all once subjects of the Dechu state. Killing each other was not as satisfying as fighting an enemy. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at the two's expressions and understood. He did not force them. If these two did not have any hesitation about the Dechu state troops, he would be worried. He turned to look at Yi Li and asked, "What does Miss Li think we should do?" Yi Li thought for a moment and said, "Why not let General Lu Jingxian lead 400,000 troops?" Lu Jingxian and Zhang Qilan were known as the two pillars of the Mahist army. Whether it was ability or prestige, they were definitely capable of leading an area. If he was really used as a fierce general, It would be a waste of talent. Even though Lu Jingxian was not present, he would not have any objections to Mo Xiaoyao's orders. Yuan Pei said with some worry, "Is 800,000 too little?" Yi Li shook her head and smiled. Even though General Lu only has 400,000 troops, the Chu capital still has General Leng Huai leading 200,000 troops. Even though it is not enough to compare to the Dechu state's troops, the Mahist army is definitely stronger than the Dechu state's troops in terms of combat strength. General Lu is skilled at using troops. He will not lose to the Dechu state's troops. Hearing Yi Li say this, Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment before nodding. Let's do as Miss Li says. After finishing the discussion, Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li brought the sleepy Mo Xiaobao back to the room prepared by Fei Hongguan to rest. Seeing Mo Xiaobao fall asleep, Mo Xiaoyao pulled Yi Li to the side and asked with a smile, "Miss Li, what do you want to say?" Yi Li hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I plan to follow General Lu to the Dechu state's front lines." She originally thought that Mo Xiaoyao would refuse. Unexpectedly, Mo Xiaoyao only thought for a moment before nodding. "That's fine. However, Miss Li, you must be careful." Seeing her clearly shocked expression, Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. He lowered his head and touched her forehead. "Miss Li, did you think I wouldn't agree?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows. In the past, every time they wanted to go out, they had to haggle for a long time. Wasn't it obvious? Mo Xiaoyao was in a good mood as he pulled her into his embrace. "I have a feeling that after this time, Miss Li will not be able to leave I's side. So, if Miss Li wants to go, then go." Mo Xiaoyao understood that after this time, the world situation would not change for at least the next 20 years. As for 20 years later, that was none of his business. Yi Li nodded and said with a faint smile, "Since it's like this, then I'll thank Prince." Mo Xiaoyao gently rubbed her black hair and said with a smile, "After this time, we won't have to fight anymore. Miss Li will no longer have a reason to leave I and run around by herself. But don't worry, wherever Miss Li wants to go, I will accompany Miss Li." Yi Li gently leaned into his embrace. Her heart was as warm as water. In the blink of an eye, 11 or 12 years had passed. In the beginning, they only wanted to spend their days together. Later on, they wanted to help each other in times of need. The two of them had already been together for more than 10 years. They already had 3 children, but they had also realized that they could only be together for the rest of their lives. In the beginning, this was something that Yi Li did not even think about. "Xiaoyao, when Xian and Lin grow up, let's go sightseeing, okay?" Leaning into Mo Xiaoyao's embrace, Yi Li asked softly. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said with a smile, "The things that Miss Li likes, I will do with you." But in his heart, he did not approve of Xian and Lin growing up. When Mo Xiaobao grew up, it would be fine. Wasn't an older brother used to take care of his younger siblings? Otherwise, what was the use of having him? So, in his father's eyes, the poor Mo Xiaobao was not only a candidate to clean up the mess, but also a nanny for his 2 younger siblings in the future. The next morning, Yi Li quietly left Fei Hong Pass and went to Lu Jinxian's camp. The generals in Fei Hong Pass did not care when they found that their princess had disappeared. They were already used to their princess disappearing from time to time to do some important things. Only Mo Xiaobao was unhappy. Because after his mother left, his father began to squeeze him even more. Northern tribes on the snowy plains of the land of ice and snow, the royal house of the northern tribes stood in the depths of the snowy plains. Different from the resplendent Chu capital and the emperor of Xiling city, the royal house of the northern tribes was much more simple and crude. It was like a city made of stone. Although this was the most prosperous place in the northern tribes, only the royal house of the northern tribes lived in the city. Ordinary people still lived in their own tents. So, the entire royal house of the northern tribes was not even as big as the Chu capital's imperial palace. Chapter 956. The weather in the northern tribes was terrible. Every year, there would be 3 to 4 months where snow would seal the borders. It was no wonder that the northern tribes yearned for the fertile land of the Dechu state. In the palace, the king of the northern tribes sat on a throne covered with tiger skin. He looked at the people below him angrily. The charcoal fire warmed up the entire room, but at this moment, it made it even hotter. The king of the northern tribes was already 60 years old. When he was young, he was a great hero of the grasslands. But as he got older, or perhaps it was because of the many things from the central plains that spread to the northern tribes, or perhaps it was human nature, the old king of the northern tribes gradually became muddle-headed and lustful. But even so, when he heard the news of Yeluye's death, he was furious. The crown prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Hong, was also complaining in his heart. He did not expect Mo Xiaoyao to move so quickly and defeat the hundreds of thousands of northern tribes soldiers in one fell swoop. In these 3 years, in order to conquer the Dechu state, the northern tribes had sacrificed nearly 2 million soldiers. But what they managed to get back were some meaningless gold, silver, jewels, and antiques. There were many gold and silver mines in the grasslands. The northern tribes did not lack gold and silver. As for antiques, they did not know how to appreciate them. Needless to say, because they did not conquer the capital of the Dechu state, they did not manage to get their hands on any real treasures. To the northern tribes, these things were not worth as much as silk, tea leaves, and food. Yelu Hong chose to work with Mo Xiaoyao only because he wanted to destroy his brother, Yeluyi. He did not want to destroy the remaining hundreds of thousands of northern tribes soldiers. But now, looking at the letter in his hand, Yelu Hong felt a chill in his heart. But he could not say anything. He could not blame Mo Xiaoyao for being too good at fighting and destroying the entire northern tribe's army. He could only blame Yeluyi for being too useless. Crown Prince. The king of the northern tribes panted. Yelu Hong hurriedly collected his thoughts and stepped forward, replying in a deep voice, "This son is here." The king of the northern tribes said, "Bring that woman from the Dechu state over to I." Yelu Hong was slightly startled, hesitating. Princess Ronghua had been with him for more than 10 years and had given birth to several children for him. Although they were from Dechu state, they still had some feelings for each other. What's more, the relationship between Princess Ronghua and Princess Ding was very good. Although she was set up by Mo Xiaoyao this time, she didn't actually do anything, so she avoided the danger of being discovered by her father. Moreover, Mo Xiaoyao had helped him kill Yeluyi. Chapter 957. Wait! Suddenly, Yelu Hong stood up and said, "Crown Prince." The king of the northern tribes was furious. The more incompetent and self-opinionated a person was, the more they could not stand the opposing opinions of others. Moreover, the king of the northern tribes was furious. Seeing that Yelu Hong dared to refute him for a woman from Dechu state, he was furious. His gaze towards Yelu Hong was filled with killing intent. Yelu Hong lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, "Father, please listen to me. Princess Ronghua cannot be killed." At the door, Princess Ronghua was stunned when she heard Yelu Hong's voice. She turned to look at Yelu Hong, her beautiful eyes moved. She had already given up, but she did not expect Yelu Hong to speak up for her. The king of the northern tribes was so angry that he laughed. He stared at Yelu Hong and said, "Cannot be killed? How come I do not know that there is anyone in the northern tribes that I cannot kill?" Yelu Hong said in a low voice, "I know that seventh brother died on the battlefield, and father must be very sad. But father, please think of the northern tribes." The king of the northern tribes narrowed his eyes and sneered at Yelu Hong, "You mean that if I kill this woman, it will affect the northern tribes?" Yelu Hong said seriously, "Ronghua is Princess Ding's sworn sister. She has a very good relationship with Princess Ding. Everyone knows that Ding Wang dotes on Wang Fei. If Fu Wang kills Ding Wang Fei's sworn sister, I'm afraid that in Ding Wang Fei's anger, he will harm our northern tribes." Princess Ronghua and Yili being sworn sisters was naturally made up by Yelu Hong. Since the Dechu state was far away from the royal house of the northern tribes, the king of the northern tribes could not send people to verify it. The reason why Yelu Hong said this was because in the northern tribes, the relationship between sworn siblings was very important. The relationship between sworn siblings was not inferior to that of family. The king of the northern tribes snorted, "Harm the northern tribes? I am about to take revenge for ye." Yelu Hong looked up at the king of the northern tribes and said firmly, "Father, now, does the northern tribes have any soldiers to mobilize? How is father going to avenge seventh brother?" The northern tribes had a vast territory but sparsely populated. A 2 million strong army could be said to be the strength of a country. In the next 20 to 30 years, the northern tribes would not be able to fight a war. At this point, Yelu Hong finally understood Mo Xiaoyao's intention. Mo Xiaoyao wanted to deal with Genom of Gojoseon of Xiling and Mo Jingli of Dechu State. From the start, he would not give the northern tribes a chance to recover. By the time the northern tribes recovered, the Prince Sting mansion would have already ruled the world. For some reason, even though the situation in the Central Plains was still unclear, Yelu Hong never doubted that the Prince Sting mansion would be the final winner. "Father, for the sake of the northern tribes, please calm your anger for now." Killing Princess Ronghua could only vent his anger, but she was the princess of Dechu State, not the princess of the Prince Sting mansion. Even if his father wanted to vent his anger, it would be extremely limited. Why not exchange her for something of value? In fact, the king of the northern tribes knew that the current northern tribes did not have the ability to compete with the Mahist army. He clamored for the cavalry to avenge Princess Ronghua because he was angry. Yelu Hong's words gave him a way out, so he took advantage of it. He looked at Yelu Hong and asked, "Something of value? What value can a woman have?" Yelu Hong pondered for a moment and said, "We can exchange Princess Ronghua and the Mahist army for the remains of seventh brother and the northern tribes' soldiers. These soldiers died on the battlefield for the northern tribes. If we can bring their remains back to the grassland, it may be a comfort for the people of the northern tribes." The king of the northern tribes lowered his head and pondered. Although he was muddle-headed, he was not an idiot who did not know anything. When he was young, he was wise and powerful. Naturally, he understood what Yelu Hong's words meant. And he only needed to exchange a dispensable woman. It was indeed a very cost-effective thing. He looked up and glanced at Princess Ronghua at the door and asked, "Will the Prince Sting mansion agree?" Yelu Hong nodded and said, "Not to mention the friendship between Princess Ronghua and Princess Ding, Princess Ronghua came to the northern tribes for the marriage of Dechu State. Although the Prince Sting mansion is in power now, the people of the Prince Sting mansion were once the people of Dechu State. If the Prince Sting mansion does not care about Princess Ronghua's life, it will inevitably cause dissatisfaction and discussion among the people of Dechu State." The king of the northern tribes nodded irritably and waved his hand, "I will leave this matter to you. In short, I do not want to see this woman in the northern tribes again. You can all leave." Yelu Hong nodded and accepted the order. He thought for a moment and asked, "Father, what about seventh brother's funeral?" "It's up to you." Years of strong wine and beautiful women had made the king of the northern tribe's body a little weak. After a bout of anger, he felt a little tired and impatiently said. Yelu Hong responded and left. When he walked to the door, he looked back and glanced at the man who was holding a girl of the northern tribes. His lips showed a trace of a mocking smile. It turned out that the death of seventh brother was just a bout of anger for his father. Back in the crown prince's mansion, Princess Ronghua was escorted back to her room to pack her things. Even her son was not allowed to see her again. Princess Ronghua packed up the service of the Dechu state for several years. Looking at the room where she had lived for more than 10 years, she could not help but burst into tears. "Princess, the crown prince saved you." In the room, a woman who looked like a maid said in a low voice. Princess Ronghua raised her head and looked at the person who came. This was the person sent by the Prince Sting mansion to protect her safety and help her. After these years of getting along, Princess Ronghua also had some trust in her. She wiped her tears and nodded with a wry smile. "I know. He was willing to speak up and save my life. I should be satisfied." The woman did not speak anymore. She just calmly looked at Princess Ronghua with a touch of faint warmth. One was the princess of the Dechu state, the other was the crown prince of the northern tribes. It was already very good that Princess Ronghua could have such an ending between the two hostile countries. Princess, don't worry. Go back to the Dechu state and start a new life. After a long time, the woman whispered. Princess Ronghua smiled faintly and nodded. Yes, I haven't been back to the Chu capital for a long time. I don't know if it's still the same as before. She knew that she was able to return to the Dechu state with her life because Yelu Hong was not too cruel. She also had the help of the Prince Ding mansion. Although she was reluctant to part with the child, neither the king of the northern tribes nor Yelu Hong would allow her to take the child away. She only hoped that the mother and son would meet again in this life. In a tent in the military camp of the Dechu state, Yaoji sat peacefully in the tent, casually flipping through a book. Beside her, Mu Lai was also holding a book, but he was reading it very seriously. Yaoji leaned lazily on the soft couch, her eyes calm and distant. In order to get Mu Yang to bring her and Mu Lai to the military camp, Yaoji put in a lot of effort. Fortunately, the rules of the military camp of the Dechu state were not as strict as those of the Mahist army. What's more, with the precedent of Princess Ding accompanying Prince Ding in and out of the military camp, it was much easier to make an exception. Although she did not have the ability to strategize like Princess Ding, as long as she could persuade Prince Li, would that be enough? And it did not seem difficult to persuade Mo Jingli. Thinking of the beautiful women in Prince Li's tent, Yaoji smiled faintly. Chapter 958. Mu Lai glanced sideways at Yaoji, who was smiling faintly and thinking about something. He raised his eyebrows and asked, Mother, what are you smiling about? Yaoji raised her eyebrows and smiled. You're getting used to it. Mu Lai raised his chin and said proudly, I've never been used to it. Aren't you my mother? Yaoji smiled and hugged Mu Lai. She raised her hand and rubbed his little head. Isn't that so? I'm your mother. Perhaps it was because he started practicing martial arts too early and hurt his muscles and bones. Although Mu Lai was already 11 or 12 years old, he still looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. The two of them got along over the years and developed some feelings for each other. Thus, Mu Lai recognized Yaoji as his adoptive mother. Yaoji truly loved Mu Lai. Moreover, this child had made great contributions to the Prince Ding mansion at such a young age. His future was bound to be limitless. Yaoji was naturally happy that Mu Lai was still willing to recognize her as his adoptive mother despite knowing her identity. She loved Mu Lai even more. Mu Lai chuckled at her. Yaoji couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. She heard Mu Lai say slowly, I forgot to tell Mother that I also recognized Commander Qin as my adoptive father a few days ago. The smile on Yaoji's face froze. She looked at Mu Lai's happy face and was speechless for a long time. As if he didn't see Yaoji's expression, Mu Lai leaned back in his chair and said with a smile, We'll be home soon. Don't you plan on what to do with my adoptive father after we return? It was originally nothing much. Mu Lai would each recognize a adoptive father and adoptive mother. However, when it was mentioned together, she couldn't help but blush. She rolled her eyes at Mu Lai helplessly. You're just a child. Why are you poking your nose into other people's business? Mu Lai smiled. Other people's business? I only have one adoptive mother and one adoptive father. I don't want to go back and recognize another adoptive mother or adoptive father. Adoptive mother, don't you agree? Yaoji raised her hand and placed the book in her hand on Mu Lai's face. Don't talk nonsense. Be careful and don't get carried away. If you fail miserably at the end, you'll be laughed at. Mu Lai rubbed his nose. He understood that Yaoji was right. The closer it was to the end, the more he had to be more careful. General Mu. A guard's voice came from outside the tent. Mu Lai and Yaoji looked at each other and stood up. Mu Yang had already walked in from outside. When he saw the book in Mu Lai's hand, he couldn't help but smile. He reached out and patted Mu Lai's shoulder. Lai is hard-working, but you don't have to work too hard. Mu Lai nodded silently and rolled his eyes in his heart. To be honest, this cheap father of his had treated him quite well. Unfortunately. Who told the Mu family to offend His Highness Prince Ding? If Mu Yang and old Marquis Mu Yang knew that the grandson of the Mu family that they had doted on for several years was just a fake and a spy at that, who knows how angry they would be. Thinking of this, Mu Lai looked at Mu Yang with some sympathy. Mu Yang naturally couldn't understand the meaning of this glance. He thought that his son was just worried about his homework. He smiled and said, "Silly child, what you have learned is already much more than the average 8 or 9-year-old child. You don't have to force yourself too much." Mu Lai's little face instantly darkened. Of course, he had learned more than an 8 or 9-year-old child because he was not an 8 or 9-year-old child himself. Although it was very convenient to go out on missions, his height that didn't grow much in the past few years was an untouchable pain in Mu Lai's heart. The weather was cold, it was better to let Mu Yang and the house of Marquis Mu Yang die. Mu Yang sat down on the chair beside the soft couch. Yaoji poured a cup of hot tea for him from the table and asked with a smile, "Why are you still free to come over at this time?" The army had just arrived at the front line not far from the Mahist army. These days, Mu Yang and old Marquis Mu Yang had been busy with military affairs with Mo Jingli. Although Yaoji and Mu Lai came to the army with Mu Yang, they hadn't seen each other for a few days. Mu Yang said, "The Mahist army is led by Prince Ding and has wiped out the northern tribe's army. Now Prince Ding has returned to Feihong Pass to confront Lei Jinting. Lu Jinxian's army is also moving to the front line. I'm afraid I don't have time to take care of you these days. Now that I'm free, I'll come back to take a look." Yaoji smiled sweetly and said, "I'll take good care of Lai. You don't have to worry about us." Mu Yang nodded, holding Yaoji's hand and smiled, "That's good, it's been hard for you to follow us all the way." Yaoji lowered her eyes and smiled faintly, "It's what I should do, there's no need to say it's not hard." Mu Yang looked at Yaoji's gentle and beautiful face, a trace of relief and tenderness flashed in his eyes. Holding Yaoji's hand, he nodded and said, "That's good, I'll go back first. Take good care of yourselves." Yaoji and Mu Lai stood up to send Mu Yang out, then turned back to sit down. Mu Lai frowned and said, "Mu Yang won't come back, we can't just walk around outside, how can we get the information of Mo Jingli's army's deployment and defense?" Yaoji smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. When the time comes, we'll try to get in touch with General Liu." Mu Lai nodded. Wang Fei didn't ask them to get the Dechu State's defensive deployment map. She probably had something more important to tell them. They only needed to wait for news, and when necessary, provide some assistance to the Mahist army. In the large tent of the Dechu State's army, because the emperor was personally leading the army, the size of the tent was completely different from that of a normal commander's tent. It was much more spacious and magnificent. Even though the weather in the north was still bitterly cold, the thick carpet from the western regions was spread out, and the fine silver charcoal burned quietly. The entire tent was warm and comfortable. But Mo Jingli's expression did not become amiable because of the warmth and comfort of the tent. Instead, it became even more sinister. The generals below all bowed their heads in fear, not daring to look at the high and mighty emperor. The matter of the emperor's descent did not improve Mo Jingli's mood. Ever since that night at the Li Wang Fu last year, Mo Jingli's cold aura was enough to make anyone retreat. Those who did not know did not dare to ask, and the few who knew did not dare to ask. People only knew that the young emperor had suddenly fallen ill and died, and then King Li ascended the throne. Everything happened so quickly that many people did not have time to react before King Li ascended the throne with absolute power. But after ascending the throne, Mo Jingli's temper became even colder and stranger than before, and his mood was unpredictable. As a monarch who had just ascended the throne, Mo Jingli was the first to personally lead the army instead of comforting the court and the people. The northern militant army has been defeated, so Mo Xiuyao's attention will definitely be on the southern front. Now, Mo Xiaoyao has sent Lu Jingxian to lead 400,000 soldiers to face the Dechu state's army. What do you all think? Mo Jingli asked in a low voice. The generals all looked at each other, and no one dared to speak. Not only had the northern militant army been defeated, they had been completely annihilated. This caused the Maoist army generals to feel a chill in their hearts. Furthermore, the Dechu state and the Xiling alliance had taken advantage of the battle between the Maoist army and the northern militant army to send out their own troops. The Xiling alliance and the Maoist army were pure enemies, so naturally, they would use all means possible. But the Dechu state and the Maoist army were still connected. King Li's actions would inevitably cause the people and soldiers to feel a chill in their hearts. Chapter 959. What? None of you have anything to say? Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and said coldly. Your Majesty has his own decision. We will listen to your Majesty's orders. All the generals said in unison. Mo Jingli snorted. How could he not know what these people were thinking? He glanced at them and then looked behind old Marquis Muyang. He said in a low voice, Old Marquis Muyang, what do you think? Old Marquis Muyang quickly stepped forward and reported respectfully, Your Majesty, I think that if it's just Lu Jingxian's 400,000 troops, there's nothing to worry about. But what? Mo Jingli asked. Old Marquis Muyang said, but there's still Leng Huai's 200,000 troops in the Chu capital. Leng Huai himself is also a rare talent. When the northern region's army was pressing on the border, Leng Huai guarded Zijing Pass alone for several months and prevented the northern region's million troops from taking a step past Zijing Pass. From this, it can be seen that this person cannot be underestimated. Other than that, this official thinks that one of Prince Ding and Princess Ding might come over. At that time, Leng Huai, Mo Xiaoyao, Yi Li. Mo Jingli played with the jade thumb ring in his hand and snorted, Leng Huai is deeply indebted to the emperor, but he betrayed the country and joined the Prince Ding mansion. He deserves to be beheaded for his crimes. As for the Prince Ding mansion, I'm afraid it's Yi Li who will come this time. She came at the right time. Hearing Mo Jingli's words, all the generals silently criticized in their hearts, Leng Huai guarded Zijing Pass alone. Not only did King Li not give any help, but he also embezzled Leng Huai's provisions. In the end, he even took away the provisions that should have been given to Leng Huai by Yuan Bao. If it wasn't for the Maoist army, Leng Huai's grave would be covered with tall grass. How could he say that he had received the emperor's favor? Moreover, in order to protect the Chu capital, Leng Huai had lost a son. Mo Jingli's words were not very convincing. However, Mo Jingli was the emperor. Naturally, he had the final say. None of the generals dared to refute him. He just silently listened to his orders. Mo Jingli was displeased. He waved his hand and said lightly, Senior Marquis Muyang, I'll leave Lu Jingxian to you. As for Princess Ding, I will personally deal with her. Muyang and his son hurriedly cupped their hands and accepted the order. This general obeys. Reporting to your Majesty, Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon of Westhill requests an audience, a soldier reported loudly outside the door. Mo Jingli frowned slightly. Lei Tingfeng. What is he doing here? The soldier replied, Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon only said that he was ordered by Genom of Gojoseon to have an important matter to discuss with your Majesty. Let him in, Mo Jingli ordered. After a while, Lei Tingfeng was brought in. He looked at the generals in the tent and Mo Jingli who was sitting high on the dragon throne. He smiled faintly and bowed. This one is Lei Tingfeng. Greetings to Emperor Chu. Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon, please rise. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and sized up Lei Tingfeng in front of him. The current Lei Tingfeng was clearly much calmer than when he first met him in Nanzhao. Even though he was facing Mo Jingli who had already become the emperor of the Dechu state, he was still neither servile nor overbearing. He was calm and composed. Even rarer was that his gaze had become extremely calm and steady. This was something that Lei Tingfeng did not have back then. Mo Jingli stared at Lei Tingfeng. After a while, he asked leisurely, Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon of West Hill, what brings you here? Lei Tingfeng smiled faintly. Replying to Emperor Chu, father heard that Emperor Chu has already led his troops to the front lines. He specially ordered Tingfeng to come and welcome you. Hearing this, the old generals present couldn't help but look at Lei Tingfeng with some praise. Back when Prince Ding was getting married, Lei Tingfeng, as the crown prince of Genom of Gojoseon, had come to the Chu capital to attend the wedding. Although he was not arrogant, it was inevitable that people would feel that he was somewhat arrogant. But the current Lei Tingfeng was not only much calmer than 10 years ago, his mentality was also much more peaceful. Genom of Gojoseon definitely did not order him to welcome Mo Jingli, but it was rare that he could lower his head. Obviously, Lei Tingfeng's words made Mo Jingli's mood somewhat better. His gaze toward Lei Tingfeng also became somewhat warmer. Mo Jingli nodded and smiled. Genom of Gojoseon is too polite. Crown Prince, please sit. Many thanks to Emperor Chu. Lei Tingfeng spoke and smiled naturally. There was no trace of dissatisfaction or awkwardness due to the fact that someone he looked down on in the past was now higher than him. After giving his thanks, Lei Tingfeng sat down at the head of the table. After the guards served tea and left, Mo Jingli also dismissed the generals, leaving behind Marquis Muyang, his son, and a few of his trusted generals. Mo Jingli then asked, I heard that Crown Prince of Genom of Gojoseon conquered Wei City in one fell swoop. I have yet to congratulate Crown Prince. Lei Tingfeng smiled. This one was just lucky. A few days ago, I was trapped by Marquis Nan and General Murong and almost lost my life. If it wasn't for father's thorough arrangements, Lei Tingfeng would have already ceased to exist. This one does not dare to take the credit. Mo Jingli smiled faintly and didn't say much. Crown Prince, what instructions does Genom of Gojoseon have for you? Lei Tingfeng said, father instructed this one to listen to Emperor Chu's instructions. It's just that, on the way here, this one received news that Princess Ding and Yi Li have already joined Lu Jinxian's army. I'm afraid that they will arrive at the front lines at the same time as Lu Jinxian. This time, the Mahist army is being led by Yi Li. Mo Jingli asked with a frown. Lei Tingfeng shook his head. No, according to this one's knowledge, Princess Ding is the military advisor. Mo Jingli laughed coldly. She really knows when to yield and when not. Many thanks for the news, Crown Prince. This one understands. Lei Tingfeng frowned slightly. Does Princely have any countermeasures? Mo Jingli smiled. Crown Prince doesn't need to worry. I have my own countermeasures. Crown Prince only needs to wait and see. Seeing that Mo Jingli had no intention to say more, Lei Tingfeng didn't continue. He smiled faintly and said, if that's the case, then this one will respectfully await the good news. Mo Jingli smiled proudly. Naturally. Seeing Mo Jingli's arrogant appearance in his bright yellow dragon robe, Lei Tingfeng looked down indifferently and his lips curved into an imperceptible sneer. Chapter 960. On the official road in winter, the Mahist army was like a black dragon advancing quickly along the official road. The two people at the front were the commander-in-chief, Lu Jinxian, and Yi Li, who was dressed in white and had a white cloak draped over her shoulders. Because Lu Jinxian was the commander-in-chief and Yi Li was only a strategist, the two of them rode side by side. This was to show Wang Fei's respect for the commander-in-chief, Lu Jinxian. Following behind the two of them were Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, Yun Ting, and Su Qingfeng. Lu Jinxian looked sideways at Yi Li and smiled. Wang Fei, I'm afraid that Mo Jingli has already gathered his troops and is waiting for us ahead. Yun Ting curled his lips and said, Mo Jingli has just ascended the throne. Isn't he waiting to take down the Mahist army's spirit? But I don't know who will take down whose spirit when the time comes. Lin Han said with a righteous expression. When the others heard this, they couldn't help but laugh. Speaking of which, Mo Jingli really didn't have any outstanding military achievements. If he wanted to take down the Mahist army's spirit, he could do it from other places. On the battlefield, no one thought highly of Mo Jingli. Yi Li smiled, "It's good to have confidence, but don't let your guard down." Even though Mo Jingli didn't have any outstanding military achievements, it didn't mean that there weren't any capable people in Dechu State's army. Lu Jingxian nodded, "Wang Fei is right. Even though Marquis Muyang's character is somewhat questionable, his ability to lead an army and fight is indeed extraordinary." Marquis Muyang had been conferred the title of Marquis because of his military achievements. Back then, he had also fought on the battlefield. Speaking of which, when Marquis Muyang had dominated the battlefield, Lu Jingxian hadn't yet become famous. As they spoke, Lu Jingxian pulled on the reins and looked at the road ahead with a slight frown. Yi Li asked in a low voice, "General Lu, what's wrong?" Lu Jingxian said in a low voice, "We're about to leave the official road and turn into a mountain path. If I were the one leading the troops, there would definitely be an ambush ahead." Yi Li sized up the narrow path in front of her and asked in a deep voice, "General, are you sure?" Lu Jingxian nodded silently. Yi Li thought for a moment before looking at Lu Jingxian and saying, "General Lu is our army's commander-in-chief, so General Lu is our leader." Lu Jingxian understood that the princess consort trusted him. She nodded and said, "Thank you, princess. Order the entire army to set up camp nearby." As the commander-in-chief, he was worried that he would be held back by others and be in a difficult position. However, even though Yi Li was the military advisor, her status was far above Lu Jingxian's. This also caused Lu Jingxian to report to Yi Li about everything. Many times, it would cause an unavoidable and severe impact. Yi Li's words were to tell Lu Jingxian that he was the current commander-in-chief of the Mahist army and that he could make all the decisions himself. Since Yi Li was the military advisor, she naturally had the responsibility to act as the military advisor. The Mahist army had strict discipline. Even though the order came very suddenly, it didn't cause any chaos. After a while, the entire army set up camp not far from the official road and prepared to reorganize the troops. In the large tent, Yunting took a step forward and said in a deep voice, reporting to the great general, "This general is willing to be the vanguard and scout ahead." Lu Jingxian smiled faintly and waved his hand, saying, "General Yun, don't be impatient." On the side, Zhuojing smiled and said, "General Yun, can't you see that Commander Su isn't here?" Yunting finally realized that Su Qingfeng, who had been with them the entire time, had disappeared without a trace. Su Qingfeng was Qi Lin's detachment commander. Since he was here, it meant that Qi Lin was also here. It was much more convenient and safer to have Qi Lin scout ahead than to have him scout ahead. Only then did Yunting sit down somewhat embarrassedly. Lu Jingxian looked at Yunting with a smile and said, "General Yun's bravery is a good thing. It seems that after so many years, our Mahist army has gained a few more great generals. It wasn't easy to find a great general who could truly command the three armies. Even in the Mahist army, which was famous for its bravery, only Lu Jingxian and Zhang Qilan could truly be called a great general. Unfortunately, the two of them had been silent for many years when the Mahist army was being suppressed and had missed the best time. Otherwise, their reputations wouldn't have been limited to where they were now. Now, Yunting, He Su, Chen Yun, Sun Yaowu, Zhou Min, and Fu Zhao under the Mahist army were still young, but they all had a bright future ahead of them. For example, Yunting wasn't even 30 years old. In terms of military achievements, he was already one of the top generals of the younger generation. He was a rising star general in the future. Yunting was slightly embarrassed by Lu Jingxian's praise. He rubbed his head and looked at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and said, "It is a good thing to bravely advance, but as a general, you need to change your temper." "Many thanks for Wang Fei's teachings," Yunting said embarrassedly. He knew that his greatest weakness was that he occasionally acted impulsively. Because he was young and his personality, he didn't give people the feeling that he was as steady and reliable as Chen Yun and the others. This made Yunting feel very helpless. Every time he wanted to change, there was a saying that it was easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. How could one's personality be so easily changed? Yi didn't force this. Yun Ting was still young. Even though he was occasionally impulsive, he wasn't reckless. When he was a few years older and experienced more things, he would naturally become more steady. Lu Jingxian smiled and said, Wang Fei is too strict with General Yun. This old man has had nothing to do these years and has written down some of my thoughts. If General Yun doesn't mind, you can take a look. Hearing this, Yun Ting couldn't help but pause. It had to be known that the thoughts and experiences of a general, especially a famous general, were treasures that couldn't be bought with money. Other than father, son, master, and disciple, no one else could read them. Seeing Yun Ting in a daze, Yi coughed softly and bowed respectfully to Lu Jingxian. She said, Yun Ting. Yun Ting finally came back to his senses. He was overjoyed and hurriedly said, Many thanks to General Lu. Yun Ting will definitely study seriously and not disappoint General's expectations. Lu Jingxian laughed brightly and stood to help Yun Ting up. He said, General Yun is too polite. To the side, Zhuojing looked at the two and said with a smile, General Lu and General Yun hit it off so well. Why don't you accept General Yun as your student? Before Lu Jingxian could speak, Yun Ting had already knelt to Lu Jingxian. This student greets master and begs for master's guidance. Lu Jingxian paused and tilted his head to look at Yi Li. Lu Jingxian was already over 40 years old. Although he had a son, his son was not like his father. He liked literature and did not like martial arts. Now, his son was studying at Lishan Academy. Lu Jingxian was naturally willing to accept Yun Ting, a rising star of the Mahist army, as his disciple and pass on his life's knowledge and experience. Just the fact that he and Yun Ting, Ding Wang Fei's trusted aide and confidant, had become master and disciple was enough to make LV Jin Xian happy, not to mention that Yun Ting was someone who was very capable. However, Yun Ting was Princess Ding's trusted aide. Naturally, he had to consider Yi Li's opinion. Yi Li smiled and said, Could it be that General Lu dislikes Yun Ting's lack of talent and is unwilling to accept him? Only then did Lu Jingxian relax and smile happily. He bent over to help Yun Ting up and said with a smile, Yun Ting does not need to be so courteous. Yun Ting understood that Lu Jingxian had agreed and was immediately overjoyed. Many thanks, master.
Chapter 961. Lu Jingxian had a new disciple and was very happy inside. But he still urged, do things according to the rules in the army. Yun Ting nodded and said, Yes, thank you, Great General. Great General, Commander Su requests an audience, a guard reported from outside the door. Everyone's expressions became alert. Lu Jingxian hurriedly said, Invite Commander Su in. Su Qingfeng walked in wearing green and yellow clothing. Yun Ting curiously examined Su Qingfeng and said, Third young master, what clothing are you wearing? It was not that Yun Ting had not seen much, but that the Mahist army always wore black clothing and gave people a feeling of mystery and power. At this time, Su Qingfeng's clothing did not match Qi Lin's presence. Su Qingfeng rolled his eyes at him and said, Do I have to wear night clothing to scout the way? Night clothes were naturally a good thing, but wearing black clothes in broad daylight was clearly asking for trouble. Lu Jingxian asked in a deep voice, Have you found anything? Su Qingfeng nodded and said, Great General's guess is correct. There are no birds on the mountain path, and no people. But there are traces of large amounts of troops passing through the mountain, and, this subordinate smells a faint scent of tung oil. Speaking of this, Su Qingfeng couldn't help but frown. Tung oil? Lu Jingxian frowned and looked at Yi Li, saying, Wang Fei, I'm afraid we cannot take this shortcut. Regardless of whether the Chu army planned to burn the mountain or not, the Mahist army could not take the risk. As the saying went, fire and water were merciless. Right now, it was winter and all living things were dying. With the help of tung oil, no matter how well prepared they were, once they entered the mountain path, the Chu army would not be able to escape. Moreover, with Lu Jingxian's understanding of Mo Jingli, in order to eliminate the Mahist army, Mo Jingli wouldn't care if he had to burn down a few mountains. Yi Li nodded. Lin Han took out a huge map and spread it out on the table beside them. Lu Jingxian stepped forward and looked at the map in front of him. If we avoid this road and take a detour, I'm afraid we'll be delayed for a few days. This time, the Chu army used an open strategy. They didn't hide the fact that there was an ambush ahead. Advance, the Chu army ignited the fire. If they didn't advance, the Chu army would have more time to seize more territory and occupy more advantageous terrain. Yi Li frowned as she looked at the map. What are General Lu's plans? Lu Jingxian thought and rubbed the map in his hand. A beat later, he said, Wang Fei, please help. Yi Li smiled and said, you and I are one family. Right now, General is the commander of the army. If there is anything, General can give orders. Lu Jingxian nodded and didn't hold back. He said in a deep voice, Wang Fei, please take Yunting and lead the 200,000 Mahist army to take a detour.
Yi Li raised her head to look at Lu Jingxian and said, General Lu still wants to take the small path? This path was short, but it was filled with danger. The Dechu state soldiers didn't even need to do anything. They just needed to ignite the tung oil buried in the mountain path and it would be enough to destroy the Mahist army. 200,000 soldiers, not 2,000. If the path was set on fire, less than 20% would be able to escape. Lu Jinxian's gaze was leisurely as he said lightly, this one remembers that there is another path that can pass through here, but it will take some effort. Wang Fei, please take the people first. If it doesn't work, this one will lead the army and come from behind. Yi Li stared at the map for a while. Of course, she understood that there were some places that even Qi Lin, who had undergone professional training, might not be able to map out completely. Also, the map was really small and might not be able to show some of the more hidden places. She only asked, where does General Lu plan on coming out? Lu Jingxian pointed at a place on the map. Yi Li thought for a moment and then nodded and said, all right, Ben Fei will definitely be able to reach this place within 7 days. When the time comes, Ben Fei and the general will attack from the left and right. We can attack the Mahist army stationed here. What does the general think? Lu Jingxian looked carefully and couldn't help but smile. He clapped his hands and said, Wang Fei has good eyes. Yi Li smiled slightly and said, leave Commander Su and Qi Lin behind for General Lu. Yi Li also understood that Lu Jinxian's path wouldn't be smooth. So leaving Su Qingfeng and Qi Lin behind for him was a form of insurance. Lu Jingxian understood Yi Li's good intentions and was very moved. He quickly refused, no, Qi Lin should still be by Wang Fei's side. Yi Li shook her head and said, General doesn't need to worry. Qingfeng has already reached the north. He will naturally make the proper arrangements. Qingfeng was Qi Lin's commander. He could directly mobilize all of Qi Lin's troops. With him here, there was no need to worry about not having enough people. Seeing Yi Li insist, Lu Jingxian could only give up. He thanked Yi Li before saying, Wang Fei, take care. Yi Li smiled faintly, General, take care as well. The next morning, Lu Jingxian led tens of thousands of soldiers on the mountain path and acted as though they were preparing to force their way through. The Chu army soldiers that had been lying in ambush near the mountain path started to worry. Originally, they didn't think that Lu Jingxian would choose to pass through here. After all, Lu Jingxian could be considered an old general whose name had shaken the region. How could he not understand that while this mountain path was a shortcut, it was also filled with danger? Therefore, Mo Jingli didn't send many soldiers to lie in ambush here. At most, it was just for show. However, this empty fort strategy clearly couldn't fool Lu Jingxian. Although they could also set fire to the mountain, this was the last resort. It had to be known that it was winter now. Once a fire was lit, no one knew when it would be extinguished. What do we do? The general lying in ambush looked at the situation in front of him and couldn't help but frown. He tilted his head and asked the person beside him. The comrade beside him frowned and said, don't panic. This place is easy to defend and hard to attack. Lu Jingxian probably won't be able to break through in a short amount of time. Let's quickly report to Prince Li and Marquis Muyang. In the end, the Mahist army and the Chu army were still a family. Unless it was absolutely necessary, no one wanted to use such a tragic method to kill the other. Moreover, facing the battle-hardened Mahist army, the Chu army had an almost natural fear. The Chu army on the mountain didn't know that when they quickly reported the Mahist army's movements, Yili had already left with another group of people. In the Chu state army, Mo Jingli looked at the secret letter in front of him and frowned. When Marquis Muyang and the others saw him like this, they quickly asked, "Emperor, is there something wrong with the Mahist army?" Mo Jingli said in a deep voice, "Lu Jingxian is preparing to force his way through the mountain path." "Old Marquis Mu, is your plan really working?" Old Marquis Muyang also frowned and said in a deep voice, "If Lu Jingxian really wants to pass through there, this old official dares to guarantee that his entire army will be wiped out. But, with this old official's understanding of Lu Jingxian, he doesn't seem to be such a stupid person. Why would he seek his own death?" When old Marquis Muyang first set up this place, he didn't intend to wipe out the Mahist army. He just wanted to slow down the Mahist army's marching speed. And with Lu Jingxian and Yi Li's ability, the success rate of ambushing them in this place was less than 0. It was also because of this that Lu Jingxian's actions were particularly hard to understand. Muyang asked, "Could it be a cover?" Lu Jingxian and Princess Ding might have split up their forces. Lu Jingxian only left a small group of people behind to divert our attention. Old Marquis Muyang said, "It's very likely that they split up their forces, so Prince still needs to pay attention to the situation on the road." But LV Jingxian's total military strength was less than 400,000. It was reported that LV Jingxian had placed at least 200,000 soldiers outside the mountain path. What was the use of Princess Ding bringing a few 100,000 soldiers? Besides, if it's about marching and fighting, in this old official's opinion, Princess Ding is not as good as Lu Jingxian. Although Yi Li had successively fought several famous generals including Genom of Gojoseon and pacified the northern region, old Marquis Muyang was still a veteran. But as long as old generals like old Marquis Muyang seriously analyzed the situation, they would be able to see that Yi Li was not proficient in the art of war. It was just that she often made unexpected moves. She was better at controlling and influencing the situation outside of the battlefield to push the entire war situation. But it wasn't that Yi Li's art of war was godly. Chapter 962. Lei Tingfeng, who was sitting on the guest seat, lowered his eyes. He was also thinking about Lu Jingxian's intention. However, he was also as puzzled as old Marquis Muyang. Mo Jingli frowned, since Lu Jingxian has already set up a formation here. However, our military strength is clearly not enough. Do we need to send more troops? Old Marquis Muyang was silent for a moment. If your majesty only wants to stop Lu Jingxian, the troops in ambush are already enough. This old subject guarantees that Lu Jingxian will definitely not be able to come over within 10 days. If your majesty wants to annihilate Lu Jingxian's troops, the less than 30,000 troops in ambush were obviously not enough to take down Lu Jingxian's 200,000 troops. Old Marquis Muyang definitely did not believe that Lu Jingxian would obediently charge into the mountain path and let them set it on fire. Mo Jingli's heart moved. Lu Jingxian was a famous general in the Mahist army. His fame and prestige were so great that only Zhang Qilan and Yuan Pei could compare to him under Mo Xiaoyao. If they could annihilate Lu Jingxian's army in one fell swoop, it would be a great thing for the Chu army that had been in low morale since the start of the expedition. After a moment of silence, Mo Jingli finally made up his mind. He said in a deep voice, "Muyang, lead 100,000 troops as reinforcements. No matter the cost, you must take down Lu Jingxian's army." Muyang quickly stood up and replied in a clear voice, "This general obeys." Lei Tingfeng wanted to say something, but when he saw Mo Jingli's determined expression, he silently shut his mouth. Old Marquis Muyang looked at Mo Jingli and said, This old subject guesses that the army led by Princess Ding will definitely take a detour. At most, they will be able to confront our army in 7 to 8 days. Your Majesty, should we send people to intercept them? Mo Jingli waved his hand and said, "No need, let her come. I would like to see what ability Yi Li has to be able to successively defeat several famous generals of West Hill." It was actually a bit rude to say this in front of Lei Tingfeng. However, it was a fact that Yi Li had defeated Genom of Gojoseon and Zhu Yang's Jinghua army. Even Lei Tingfeng could not refute this fact. Lei Tingfeng didn't get angry. He just smiled faintly and said, "Emperor Chu should be more cautious." Although Imperial Father lost to Princess Ding, he has always admired Princess Ding's strategy. In this world, there are many people who have suffered losses from Princess Ding. Let's not talk about the distant ones. Let's talk about the former Ren Qining of the northern region. His country was destroyed, and his family was destroyed. Lei Tingfeng's words seemed very gentle and polite. However, in Mo Jingli's ears, it was exceptionally harsh. There was no other reason. Mo Jingli was also one of the people who had suffered losses in the hands of Yi Li. And it was just a few months ago, even more recently than Ren Qining. Mo Jingli snorted softly and said, "Thank you for your reminder, Prince Genom of Gojoseon." Lei Tingfeng smiled and didn't say anything. Of course, he knew why Mo Jingli was unhappy. Although not many people knew what had happened in the regent's residence in Nanjing, but after a few months, relying on some clues, it was enough for Lei Zhenting to speculate some confidential information. For example, the whereabouts of Princess Ding during that time. For example, young Master Qingqian's sudden disappearance and miraculous return to Glass City. Another example was the disappearance of Mo Jingli's 2 princesses. One of them had disappeared, and the other had died of illness. Combined with the time of Mo Jingli's ascension, many problems were self-evident. Mo Jingli was willing to look down on Yi Li, but when he suffered losses, there was no reason to say that he didn't remind him. Since Mo Jingli didn't listen to his advice, Lei Tingfeng didn't care anymore. Instead, he lowered his eyes and began to calculate the troops he had brought with him. Seeing that Lei Tingfeng was tactful and no longer spoke, Mo Jingli nodded with satisfaction. After ascending to the throne as the emperor, he was even more intolerant of other people's opposing opinions than before. Moreover, this was Lei Tingfeng, who had always been indifferent to him. Although he was only a prince, he always made people feel that he was superior and looked down on him. Seeing Lei Tingfeng's respectful and obedient appearance in front of him, Mo Jingli felt exceptionally happy. Standing up, Mo Jingli waved his hand and said, "This matter is settled. Mu Yang, lead the troops to intercept Lu Jingxian. I will personally lead the troops to meet Yi Li." Seeing Mo Jingli stand up and walk to the back to rest, old Marquis Mu Yang frowned slightly. There was a faint trace of worry between his brows. He still felt that it was completely meaningless to send Mu Yang with 100,000 troops. There was even less hope to completely eliminate Lu Jingxian in that place. However, Mo Jingli couldn't be persuaded. Although he hadn't been loyal to Mo Jingli for long, old Marquis Mu Yang, who was good at pandering, had completely understood what kind of person Mo Jingli was. "Father, what's wrong?" Seeing his father frown, Mu Yang asked worriedly. Old Marquis Mu Yang shook his head and whispered, "You must be careful. Lu Jingxian is a famous general of the Mahist army. You must not underestimate him. If you can't do it, don't force it." "Yes, father." Looking at his father, Mu Yang still respectfully agreed despite his doubts. Old Marquis Mu Yang shook his head and sighed softly, "Forget it, let's go back." Chapter 963. In Mu Yang's tent, Yaoji was embroidering. A figure quickly entered the tent. Yaoji was shocked and looked up vigilantly. She was relieved when she saw the person. She asked worriedly, "Why are you here?" The person was Qin Feng. Qin Feng was wearing an ordinary Chu army uniform. His face was only slightly decorated. People who were familiar with him could recognize him. However, People who were not familiar with him could not see his real face at a glance. Qin Feng looked at Yaoji, who was on the soft couch. She had shed her gorgeous and glamorous clothes and was now wearing a simple green robe with a white fox fur cloak draped over her shoulders. Compared to her previous glamorous appearance, she now looked more delicate and gentle. Qin Feng's cold eyes were slightly warm. He smiled faintly, "Don't worry. There are no outsiders outside." Yaoji nodded. She also knew that the guards near this tent were the shadow guard of the Mahist army and the Qilin arranged by Qin Feng. Therefore, she did not have to worry about being discovered when she talked with Mu Lai. Knowing that Qin Feng would not suddenly appear in her tent for no reason, Yaoji put down the needlework in her hand. She stood up and asked, "What's the matter?" Qin Feng said, "General Liu and Wang Fei are about to arrive." However, General Liu's troops were blocked by the Chu army 200 miles away. Just now, Mo Jingli ordered Mu Yang to lead 100,000 troops to reinforce. They plan to wipe out General Liu's army in one fell swoop. Yaoji frowned slightly. "Where is Wang Fei?" Qin Feng said, "Wang Fei should have taken another route. I have to leave the camp to meet Wang Fei. You will take care of everything in the Chu army's camp." Yaoji nodded, "Don't worry." "That's right." Yaoji took out a hairpin from her hair and put it in Qin Feng's hand. "This is the Chu army's defensive map. I saw it from Mu Yang. Be careful." Qin Feng raised his eyebrows and twisted the hairpin gently. The hairpin split into two halves, revealing a tiny paper roll in the middle. Qin Feng took out the piece of paper and looked at it. He memorized the things drawn on it and casually threw the paper into the charcoal basin next to him. Then, he returned the hairpin to its original state and gently put it on Yaoji's hairpin. He said indifferently, "The golden hairpin is too eye-catching in the army, it's very easy to be discovered. But, you can give it to me later." Yaoji couldn't help blushing. Although she was over 30 years old, the snow-white fox cloak still set off her delicate face, making her look beautiful. Yaoji dodged to the side and forced herself to be calm. She said, "You should go now. Be careful." Qin Feng was not in a hurry. He just looked at Yaoji thoughtfully and asked, "Are you worried about me?" Yaoji was stunned and finally sighed. "After this matter is over, if we are both still alive, I will give you an answer." It was the first time that Qin Feng saw Yaoji so straightforward. Although there was no clear answer, it was also the first time that Yaoji gave a positive answer to her feelings. Unwilling to force her, Qin Feng whispered, "Don't worry. We will all be alive. I'll go first." After that, he turned around and left the tent. Yaoji looked at the empty tent and was lost in thought. She shouldn't be thinking about these problems at this time, but it was rare for her to be lost in thought. In fact, she had understood a long time ago that Mu Yang might be a beautiful dream in every woman's heart, but Qin Feng was more like the one who could give a woman safety and loyalty. With Qin Feng's status in the Prince Ding mansion and Princess Ding, he could have any beautiful woman he wanted. Why would he wait for her, a woman who was over 30 years old and had already given birth to a child? But compared to the former Mu Yang, Yaoji was more unwilling to ruin Qin Feng. "Yaoji!" Mu Yang came in from outside and saw Yaoji standing in the middle of the tent. He couldn't help but be stunned and asked softly, "Yaoji, what's wrong?" Yaoji's eyes narrowed and a trace of determination flashed through her eyes. A faint smile appeared on her lips. She shook her head and said, "Nothing. I'm just imagining things." "What's the matter?" Mu Yang said apologetically, "I'm going to lead the army to battle. If there's anything, you can send someone to find father." Although the old Marquis Mu Yang was very unhappy that his son went to battle with a woman and a child, even the Emperor and Commander-in-Chief Mo Jingli didn't say anything. Naturally, the old Marquis Mu Yang wouldn't say anything. Moreover, Mu Lai was his only grandson. Even if he was unhappy, he would still take care of him. Yaoji nodded and turned to walk inside. "Do you need me to pack anything for you?" Mu Yang pulled her and said, "No need. It's not very far. I'll be back in a few days." You just need to take good care of Yaoji. When this northern expedition is over, the Emperor will definitely reward you according to your merits. At that time, I will ask the Emperor to give you the rank and title of lady. In the future, I won't have to worry about you and being wronged. Yaoji pushed Mu Yang's arms away slightly and said lightly, as long as is safe, it's fine. I don't need any rank or title. Mu Yang smiled faintly and thought that she declined because she was embarrassed. He didn't think much of it. Even if you're only going for a few days, you should still bring some clothes. It's still very cold in the north. Yaoji turned to the side to pack. Seeing that she insisted, Mu Yang didn't refute and walked to the side with a smile to look at some documents. After a while, Mu Lai walked in and hurriedly bowed when he saw Mu Yang. Father, are they not suitable to say that father is going to war? Mu Lai asked curiously. Mu Yang picked him up and placed him on his lap. He smiled and said, that's right. Father is leaving tonight. Chapter 964. Mu Yang understood and laughed loudly. Now our army has the upper hand. Sun will lead the troops to intercept LV Jingxian. Even if we can't obtain a complete victory, there won't be any danger. Don't worry, father. Old Marquis Muyang didn't understand why he was so worried. He could only assume that he was old and worried more. He nodded. Yaoji came out with the packed luggage. She was startled when she saw old Marquis Muyang. She bowed slightly. Old Marquis. Old Marquis Muyang nodded. Although he had some complaints about Yaoji's identity, Yaoji's behavior in the past few years had been more appropriate than Madame Sun, who was the legal wife, because she had Mu Lai as her son. Old Marquis Muyang couldn't give her any attitude. He only ordered, after Yang leaves, take good care of Lai in the tent. Don't wander around. Yaoji nodded obediently. Yaoji understands. Old Marquis, please don't worry. Mu Lai stood beside Mu Yang and said obediently, Grandfather, Lai will listen to mother's words. Old Marquis Muyang nodded in satisfaction and turned to leave. When he reached the entrance of the tent, he turned back to look at the desk Mu Yang was sitting on. Don't bring back official documents and battle reports in the future. After sending old Marquis Muyang off, Mu Yang said goodbye to Yaoji and Mu Lai before leaving with the luggage Yaoji prepared. Inside the tent, Mu Lai and Yaoji looked at each other for a while. Yaoji frowned. Did Marquis Muyang find out? Mu Lai's little face scrunched up. He thought for a while before saying, I don't think so. He probably thinks that it's not good for Muyang to put those things in the family's living quarters. No matter how smart old Marquis Muyang was, he wouldn't suspect a grandson who was only 8 or 9 years old. If old Marquis Muyang had discovered his identity, he wouldn't have just given him a few simple reminders. Yaoji nodded. Anyway, it's better to be careful. I know. Don't worry. Oh right. I just saw a few places where the Chu army is lying in ambush. I'll draw it and you can send it to General Lu later. Okay. When Mu Yang left the Chu army's camp that night, a secret letter was sent to Lu Jingxian. After Yili bid farewell to Lu Jingxian, she led the 200,000 soldiers and horses around the narrow shortcut, still taking the main road to the south. In just 2 or 3 days, they had reached a place not far from the Chu army. They set up camp and did not advance any further. This made Mo Jingli, who had been waiting there for a long time, a little disappointed. He naturally hoped that Yili would immediately lead her troops to fight the Chu army. This way, Mo Jingli would have at least an 80% chance of defeating the Mahist army. In the Mahist army's barracks, Qin Feng, who had just come out of the Chu army's barracks, also appeared here. After not seeing each other for many months, the people by Yili's side were still very familiar with Qin Feng. Yun Ting didn't hold back as he walked to the front and put his hand on Qin Feng's shoulder as he smiled. Commander Qin really comes and goes like a ghost. After not seeing each other for many months, you suddenly appeared on the battlefield again. Tell me, where have you been these past few months? Qin Feng had always been by Yi Li's side. Last time, Yi Li had come back from Jiangnan, Qin Feng had disappeared. The Mahist army was not completely uncurious. However, because Wang Fei might have sent him on an important mission, they couldn't ask. Now that Qin Feng had returned, Yunting naturally didn't hold back and wanted to know firsthand. Zhuo Jing and Lin Han naturally knew the truth, but they were also very curious. Naturally, they were curious about Qin Feng's personal matters. Yi Li had many subordinates, but the most special one was Qin Feng. Because he wasn't just the personal bodyguard that Prince Ding had personally sent to protect Wang Fei, he was also the commander of Qilin. He had probably spent more time by Princess Ding's side than Zhuo Jing and the others who had been Princess Ding's shadow guard. The ones who had the deepest relationship with him were naturally Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, and Wei Lin. Yi Li smiled faintly and glanced at Yunting as she said with a smile, "If you have any questions, ask them in private." Qin Feng, is there any news from the Chu army? Qin Feng nodded and said in a low voice, Wang Fei, Genom of Gojoseon's heir Leitingfeng appeared in the Chu army's camp the day before yesterday and hasn't left. Also, 2 days ago, Mo Jingli sent Mu Yang to lead 100,000 soldiers to intercept General Liu. Mo Jingli himself has probably already set up his troops and is waiting for Wang Fei's arrival. Yi Li's eyebrows rose slightly, Leitingfeng. Qin Feng nodded and said, that's right. When Leitingfeng was in the Chu army's camp, Mo Jingli didn't give him any preferential treatment. Leitingfeng was also very well behaved and rarely raised any objections. However, it's strange that he hasn't left. Yi Li thought for a bit and asked, what did Leitingfeng say? Qin Feng said, Leitingfeng said that he was ordered by Genom of Gojoseon to follow Mo Jingli's orders. However, Mo Jingli definitely wouldn't allow Leitingfeng to come into contact with the Chu army's military power, so he kept him there as a figurehead. Since he didn't let him do anything, he naturally couldn't do anything. However, Leitingfeng didn't seem to mind at all. Yi Li thought for a bit and then said with furrowed brows, send someone to investigate whether or not Leitingfeng has brought any troops here. Qin Feng was slightly startled and said, Wang Fei means that Leitingfeng might have secretly brought troops here. He wants to wait for the Mahist army and the Chu army to both be injured and then reap the benefits? After all, on the surface, Leitingfeng hadn't brought a single soldier to the Chu army. However, this didn't mean that he couldn't place his troops in a nearby place. Yi Li shook her head and said lightly, he might not reap the benefits, but it's possible that he's looking for an opportunity to loot a burning house. Qin Feng nodded and said with a serious expression, Wang Fei, please don't worry. This subordinate will definitely investigate Leitingfeng's intentions. Wang Fei, this is the map of the Chu army that Yaoji obtained. Qin Feng presented the map in his hands. Yi Li took it and looked at it. She asked with furrowed brows, can it be trusted? Qin Feng said, this subordinate has already sent someone to check it. It's mostly trustworthy. Mostly trustworthy? Yi Li raised her brows with interest. Qin Feng said, the map is real, but there are some places where it's half real and half fake. Mo Jingli doesn't trust the generals around him. This includes the Marquis Muyang's mansion. Qin Feng could understand this. After all, the Mahist army was defeated because of this and almost caused the Prince Ding mansion to be destroyed. Although it had nothing to do with Mo Jingli would learn from his mistakes. Besides, Mo Jingli was just as suspicious as Mo Jingli. However, Mo Jingli probably didn't expect that Qin Feng didn't use the map immediately. Instead, he used the time before Yi Li arrived to send Qi Lin to check the locations one by one. Yi Li looked at the map in her hand. It was only the size of a handkerchief and was filled with all kinds of symbols. The black map was the one Qin Feng obtained from Yaoji. The red words and symbols were added or crossed out by Qin Feng after he verified them. She handed the map over to Zhuo Jing. Very quickly, Zhuo Jing returned a brand new defensive map to Yi Li. Yi Li looked at it and put it down. She asked, do you think this is complete? Chapter 965. Qin Feng thought for a moment and then shook his head. The Chu army has 800,000 soldiers, but I think that with Mo Jingli's persistence and hatred towards the Mahist army, it might be more than that. But from the map, there are less than 600,000 people. I think Mo Jingli might be hiding a trump card. Mo Jingli has grown quite a bit, Yi Li said with a faint smile. In order to deal with the Mo family army, Mo Jingli could be said to have resorted to every conceivable means. He was even able to come up with so many ideas on the defensive deployment map. This was far beyond the intelligence that Mo Jingli usually displayed. Could this be considered an extraordinary performance? If you were Mo Jingli, where would you hide the 200,000 soldiers? Yi Li asked. Qin Feng lowered his head and thought. Yun Ting beside him also stretched his neck to look. His lips twitched as he said, if I were Mo Jingli, I would use the 200,000 soldiers to deal with the Wang family mansion. If I could defeat Wang Fei, even if General Lu breaks through the blockade, he would be alone and surrounded on all sides. Also, if Mo Jingli completely defeats Wang Fei, it would be extremely good news for the low morale of the Chu army. At the same time, it would be a heavy blow to the morale of the Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion. Yi Li smiled and said, Yun Ting has indeed grown quite a bit. Yun Ting wanted to retort that even an idiot could think of this. But then he thought, if he said that, wouldn't he be the same as an idiot? He could only laugh and say, it's because Master has taught me well. Yi Li looked at the map in front of her. She pointed at 3 places on the map and said, here, here, and here. What do you think? Lin Han said, if it's like this. As soon as our army leaves the Cold Valley Pass, we will immediately be surrounded by the mountain. In addition to Mo Jingli's forces on the surface, we will be surrounded by at least 300,000 soldiers. But, does Mo Jingli have that kind of brain? What if they thought too highly of themselves and Mo Jingli didn't think of it? In the end, it would be them scaring themselves. Qin Feng said, even if Mo Jingli doesn't have it, old Marquis Muyang will have it. Qin Feng had stayed in the Chu army camp for the longest time. He naturally knew a lot about old Marquis Muyang, who Mo Jingli valued the most and who was also the best fighter in the Chu army. Character did not represent ability. Even though many generals and officials of the Chu state despised old Marquis Muyang's character, no one could deny his ability. Yun Ting shrugged and said, if we want to surround General Lu from both sides, we have to leave the Cold Valley Pass. Even if there are 300,000 soldiers in front of us, we have to leave. We can't go back now. Maybe his master had already exterminated the Chu army and reached their destination. At that time, it would be them who were late. That wouldn't look good. Yi Li held her forehead and thought for a while. Then she laughed softly and said, Yun Ting is right. If we are late, we will harm General Lu. Hearing Yi Li say this, Yun Ting also became anxious. Princess, then what do we do? How do we pass this place? Yi Li thought for a while and had a plan. She said in a low voice, Yun Ting, lead the 150,000 soldiers to attack the Cold Valley Pass. Ah! Yun Ting was instantly shocked. He looked worriedly at Yi Li. Princess wouldn't be so anxious, right? Even though the Cold Valley Pass was not a stronghold on the border, it was the most famous ancient battlefield in the Central Plains. It was the most impregnable pass of the Central Plains. This was also the reason why LV Jingxian wanted to take a shortcut. If the two sides were at a standstill in front of the Cold Valley Pass, not to mention 150,000 people, even 500,000 people might not be able to break through the Cold Valley Pass in a few short days. Now that he knew that Mo Jingli had set up an ambush here, he probably didn't even have enough people to fill the gap between the Chu army's teeth. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, I'm not telling you to attack forcefully. You just have to pretend to attack forcefully. Don't let people suspect you. Yun Ting reacted quickly and hurriedly asked, Princess, where are you going? Since Princess had him lead the army to feign an attack, then the trap was to hide Princess' true intentions. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, the Buddha says, can't say. Yun Ting instantly became listless. He looked anxiously at Yi Li and said, "Princess, I know you're going to do something fun. Can't you bring me along?" This soldier will not hesitate to be at Princess's beck and call. Every time Princess secretly ran away, the things she did were always earth-shattering. This caused Yun Ting to feel admiration and jealousy towards Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and the others. Yi Li looked sardonically at him and said, "Right now, the only person in the army who can lead troops is you or me. Which one of us will General Yun stay behind?" Yun Ting was dejected. If Princess didn't go, then what fun would there be? If Princess went, he couldn't go. Yi Li raised a hand to pat Yun Ting's shoulder and said with a smile, "You are also very important here. How much we can do will depend on how long you can keep the Chu army under control. If you succeed, Ben Fei will personally go to General Lu to ask for a reward for you." Hearing this, Yun Ting immediately perked up. Yun Ting had just been accepted as a disciple. He had taken the time to read Lu Jinxian's letter after marching for a few days. He was full of admiration for this new master of his. He had been worried that he didn't have a battle record to show off in front of his master. Hearing Yi Li's words, he immediately perked up and said with a smile, "Don't worry, Princess. This soldier promises that I won't hinder Princess's plans." Yi Li nodded in satisfaction and said, "Very good, you can go." "Yes, this soldier will leave." Yun Ting raised his hands and left. He went out to count his own troops. Inside the tent, seeing Yun Ting charge out like the wind, everyone couldn't help but laugh. Lin Han said with a smile, "General Yun is almost 30, right? His personality is really straightforward." Yi Li also couldn't help but smile. In reality, Yun Ting wasn't young anymore. Even though he was one of the youngest generals with some fame in the world. Even though he had fought many bitter battles in the Mahist army, the Mahist army lacked the scheming of other armies. Yun Ting's personality was cheerful and he was Princess Ding's trusted aide. He naturally got along well with the Mahist army. Even though he was about to stand up, his personality was still as cheerful and straightforward as usual. Qin Feng looked at Yi Li and asked, "Princess, Yun Ting is holding back the Chu army and Mo Jingli. What are we going to do?" Yi Li smiled and said, "We are going to hunt." Chapter 966. At Cold Valley Pass, Mo Jingli looked down at the murderous Mahist army camp not far away. The Mahist army's black flag fluttered in the wind. Looking from afar, the entire Mahist army camp was full of vigor, like a black wave that would sweep over at any time. "Your Majesty, something's not right." Old Marquis Muyang and Lei Tingfeng stood on either side of Mo Jingli. Old Marquis Muyang frowned slightly. Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows, "Something's not right? What do you mean?" Old Marquis Muyang said in a low voice, "The Mahist army looks aggressive, but they've been bluffing for the past 2 days. They haven't done anything substantial. This doesn't match the style of the Mahist army. The reason why the Mahist army was famous in the world was because of their valiant fighting power and their fearless spirit. So they definitely wouldn't stop just because of the 1,000-year pass in front of them. The only explanation was that there was another conspiracy." Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, "Yi Li only has less than 100,000 soldiers. Even if she attacks Cold Valley Pass, can she take it down? I'm afraid she's waiting for Lu Jinxian, right? As long as Muyang stops Lu Jinxian, the people in front of us will be my prisoners sooner or later." Lei Tingfeng stared into the distance, deep in thought. After a while, he said indifferently, "I haven't seen Princess Ding in the past few days." Hearing this, old Marquis Muyang's expression changed and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty. Princess Ding has always been crafty, I'm afraid." Princess Ding was not only crafty, but because she had Qi Lin's help, she could appear and disappear unpredictably. Every time Princess Ding appeared, someone would be in trouble. Mo Jingli frowned. He naturally understood what old Marquis Muyang was worried about. But this time, he thought that his arrangement was flawless. No matter how smart Yili was, she couldn't find a loophole to take advantage of. Unfortunately, although the list that Dongfang Yu gave him solved the urgent problem of not being able to place people in Prince Ding Mansion, these people couldn't get in touch with Yili without arousing suspicion. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so difficult to grasp Yili's movements like now. Thinking, for safety's sake, Mo Jingli ordered, "Send someone to check if Yili is in the camp outside the pass." Old Marquis Muyang nodded hurriedly and turned around to leave to give orders. "Reporting to your Majesty, there's an urgent military situation." Before Marquis Muyang left, a soldier had already rushed up. Old Marquis Muyang's eyelids twitched. He had a bad premonition. The soldier who reported said, "Urgent report from the front line. The 100,000 soldiers led by Marquis Muyang were ambushed by Lu Jingxian's army. They were almost wiped out. Lu Jingxian has already bypassed the ambush set by our army and is heading towards the Cold Valley Pass. How can this be?" Old Marquis Muyang couldn't help but cry out. His body swayed and he almost fell to the ground. He hurriedly asked, "How is Marquis Muyang?" The soldier looked at Mo Jingli behind him and then at old Marquis Muyang. He then said, "Marquis Muyang has brought less than 10,000 soldiers and is heading towards the Cold Valley Pass." Old Marquis Muyang heaved a sigh of relief when he heard that old Marquis Muyang was fine. But when he turned around and saw Mo Jingli's expression, he secretly complained in his heart. He had been worrying about this and that, and in the end, the one who was in trouble was his son. With Mo Jingli's personality, how could he not be angry? Sure enough, Mo Jingli glanced at old Marquis Muyang with a gloomy face and asked indifferently, "Old Marquis Muyang, what do you have to say?" Old Marquis Muyang said with a bitter face, "My son failed in the battle. Please punish him, Your Majesty." On the side, Lei Tingfeng's handsome eyes narrowed. He stepped forward and said in a low voice, "Emperor Chu, Marquis Muyang is still young after all. How can he defeat a veteran like Lu Jingxian who has fought for half his life? Moreover, we need people now." Mo Jingli snorted and said to old Marquis Muyang, "For the sake of Genom of Gojoseon's face, I will give him a chance to redeem himself." Old Marquis Muyang was delighted and quickly thanked, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your kindness." Even the way he looked at Lei Tingfeng was more kind and grateful. "Thank you, Genom of Gojoseon." Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, "Old Marquis, you don't have to be so courteous. I am also doing this for the sake of the alliance between our two countries." In other words, the house of Marquis Muyang did not owe him a favor. Hearing this, old Marquis Muyang's expression became more kind. After all, it was not easy to owe a favor to Genom of Gojoseon of West Hill. Lei Tingfeng looked at Mo Jingli and said, "Emperor Chu, now that things have come to this, we should summon Marquis Muyang back as soon as possible and ask him about what happened. I still feel that this matter is really a little strange." Lei Tingfeng also knew a little about Mo Jingli and old Marquis Muyang's arrangement. It was almost flawless. At least Lei Tingfeng himself could not think of any flaws. Although Lei Tingfeng did not have many achievements in military affairs, he was after all taught by Lei Jinting. His knowledge and ability were first class. If even he could not see any flaws, it proved that old Marquis Muyang and Mo Jingli's arrangement was not a big problem. Even if Muyang could not win a complete victory, he would not lose too badly. But in just a few days, Muyang's army was almost wiped out. To say that there was no problem was even more unbelievable than Mo Xiaoyao wiping out the northern tribe's army. Hearing his words, Mo Jingli and old Marquis Muyang's expression became serious. In the end, the 100,000 troops were burned to death by the ambush that he set up. When Muyang led the remaining troops out of the Sea of Fire, they met Lu Jingxian's army. In the end, only a few thousand managed to escape. Chapter 967. After listening to Muyang's narration, Mo Jingli was so angry that his expression was incomparably ferocious. That is to say, my 100,000 soldiers were completely annihilated by LV Jinxian's mere 5,000 soldiers? Good. This is great. The others were silent. 5,000 against 100,000, this battle was undoubtedly the pinnacle battle of Lu Jinxian's life. However, it was hard to believe that this battle was won by Lu Jinxian's ability. There was only one question. How did Lu Jingxian know about the Chu army's encampment and the Chu army's ambush? It must be known that if he wasn't careful, he could set the nearby mountains on fire. At that time, even if Lu Jingxian won and the fire sealed the mountains, he wouldn't be able to pass through. Old Marquis Muyang said in a deep voice, "Emperor, there are spies from the Prince Ding mansion in our army. Moreover, they are extremely important and have access to our army's secrets." It could be said that the Chu army's encampment was found by Qi Lin, but the ambush they set up, even if Qi Lin wanted to find it, it would be difficult to do so without 10 days to half a month. Other than having spies from the Prince Ding mansion in the Chu army, old Marquis Muyang couldn't think of any other explanation. Mo Jingli rolled his eyes at old Marquis Muyang. The Prince Ding mansion's shadow guards were almost everywhere. Even Mo Jingli couldn't guarantee that there weren't any Mahist army in his residence. What he said was nonsense. On the side, Lei Tingfeng said in a deep voice, "Old Marquis Muyang is right. I'm afraid, the other party is someone very close to you. Emperor Chu, you must be careful. Also, Lu Jinxian's army is approaching. Emperor Chu, please make preparations." In the battle between Lu Jingxian and Muyang, the losses were almost negligible. When the two Mahist armies approached the Cold Valley Pass one after the other, the Chu army would not only lose their geographical advantage, they might even fall into a trap. Mo Jingli said solemnly, "Pass down my decree. Order the 200,000 men of the Western Army to intercept Lu Jinxian's army with all their might. Muyang, Jin will give you one last chance. If you let Lu Jingxian reach the Cold Valley Pass, you should just kill yourself." Mo Jingli coldly glanced at Muyang. Muyang immediately felt a killing intent that seemed to have materialized from Mo Jingli's cold eyes. Muyang shuddered and hurriedly responded, "This general obeys. This general will take his leave." Mo Jingli snorted and said, "The Marquis will be in charge of investigating the spies in the Mahist army. Everyone else is dismissed. I have something to discuss with Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon." "Yes, we will take our leave," the generals replied in unison. Lei Tingfeng was not surprised. Mo Jingli thought highly of himself. If he did not suffer some losses, he would not even put a little Genom of Gojoseon in his eyes. Fortunately, Lei Tingfeng's personality had changed a lot. Otherwise, the two of them would have already fallen out. Only Mo Jingli and Lei Tingfeng were left in the tent. Mo Jingli looked at Lei Tingfeng and sighed, "I've let Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon see a joke." Lei Tingfeng said respectfully, "Emperor Chu is too serious. Victory and defeat are common in war. In fact, it is not only Emperor Chu, but also father's side is not going well. The Mahist army has shocked the world for 200 years. It is not an undeserved reputation." This was not Lei Tingfeng comforting Mo Jingli. Mo Jingli naturally had his own sources of information. How could he not know that the battle between Mo Xiaoyao and Lei Jinting was more intense than their side? Compared to the battle at Feihong Pass, the situation here paled in comparison. This could be said to be the first real battle between Lei Jinting and Mo Xiaoyao. Naturally, it attracted the attention of the whole world. However, the battle over there did not go smoothly just because the Xiling army had the upper hand. The two armies were in a stalemate. Every battle was soul-stirring. Up until now, Lei Jinting had not been able to gain any advantage. Mo Jingli frowned and thought for a moment. Then, he said, "I can help Genom of Gojoseon." Lei Tingfeng raised his eyebrows slightly. He still looked at Mo Jingli respectfully but not humbly. Lei Tingfeng still remembered that Mo Jingli had married Dongfang Yu. Although the infinite boundless mountain had been completely destroyed, no one could say for sure what benefits Mo Jingli had gained from Dongfang Yu. Since Mo Jingli dared to say that he would help Lei Jinting, it was naturally not a joke. Emperor Chu, please advise me, Lei Tingfeng said. Mo Jingli smiled faintly and said, I dare not advise you, but I still have a few people in the Prince Ding mansion that I can use. Hearing this, Lei Tingfeng's heart skipped a beat. The most difficult thing to deal with in the Prince Ding mansion was not the strength of the Mahist army, nor the intelligence of Mo Xiaoyao and Su Qingchen, but its almost impenetrable defense. In this world, the news that everyone knew was what the Prince Ding mansion was willing to let people know. But the news that Mo Xiaoyao was not willing to let people know, they could not find out in any way. Over the years, although people from all walks of life had been persevering in placing people in the Prince Ding mansion, almost none of them were really useful. Instead, many of their own elites were lost. Seeing that Lei Tingfeng seemed to be unwilling to believe, Mo Jingli was not in a hurry. He smiled faintly and said, the Crown Prince of the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Yuchen, is now in Feihong Pass. Lei Tingfeng's eyes flashed slightly. The whereabouts of the Crown Prince of the Prince Ding mansion was naturally extremely secretive in the Mahist army. Mo Jingli seemed to have known it for a long time. It seemed that there was indeed something special. Mo Jingli smiled faintly and said, in addition, the twins of Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li are now being raised in the Su family. Lei Tingfeng's mind turned quickly, and he soon calmed down. He smiled faintly and said, it seems that Emperor Chu's people are not in the Mahist army, but in Li City. In this case, it seems that they are not of much use to my father. Mo Jingli smiled and said, whether they are useful or not depends on how Genom of Gojoseon uses them. What does Emperor Chu want? Lei Tingfeng asked. Knowing that Lei Tingfeng had compromised, Mo Jingli smiled satisfactorily and said, how many people did the Crown Prince of Genom of Gojoseon bring? Lei Tingfeng sighed somewhat helplessly, the infinite boundless mountain is indeed a disaster. Fortunately, it has been destroyed long ago. I only have a mere 150,000 troops in my hands, but it is just a precaution. I definitely do not have any disloyalty to Emperor Chu. I naturally believe in the Crown Prince of Genom of Gojoseon. Mo Jingli smiled and said. Now that the two armies were in an alliance to fight against the Mahist army, Lei Tingfeng naturally would not have any thoughts. However, that would not necessarily be the case once the outcome was decided. Lei Tingfeng said, I am willing to assist Marquis Muyang in intercepting Lu Jingxian. Mo Jingli nodded satisfactorily, writing a few words on a piece of paper and handing it over, saying, this is a gift for Genom of Gojoseon. Lei Tingfeng glanced at it, then casually tossed the piece of paper into the charcoal fire by the side, smiling mildly and saying, many thanks to Emperor Chu. I will take my leave. Watching Lei Tingfeng leave, Mo Jingli laughed coldly and said, who said that I have no men in the Mahist army? Mo Xiaoyao. I want to see who will have the last laugh. Inside Mu Yang's tent, Yaoji was currently bandaging his wounds. Looking at the man who was riddled with wounds, Yaoji's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly, not saying anything. Beside her, Mu Lai was also looking at Mu Yang, his big eyes filled with worry. Father, are you all right? Chapter 968. Mu Yang shook his head, raised his uninjured hand and patted Mu Lai's head. Father is fine, don't be afraid. Mu Lai nodded and sat obediently beside Mu Yang, watching Yaoji treat his wounds. Outside the tent, a soldier reporting to Marquis, Senior Marquis asked you to go over after treating your wounds. Mu Yang nodded, I know, you can go. Yaoji frowned, why aren't you resting after suffering such a serious injury? Mu Yang smiled helplessly, I'm about to leave again. Father probably wants me to go over to give some orders. Don't worry, I didn't hurt any vital parts. But, your injuries, Mu Yang sighed, although this defeat was caused by the Mahist army receiving the information in advance, I still lost after all. The emperor gave me a way out and asked me to lead the army to resist Lu Jinxian's army to atone for my mistake. How can I say no so easily? Yaoji also knew the severity of the matter and nodded, then you must be careful. Mu Yang smiled, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." After tidying up a little, Mu Yang went to Senior Marquis Mu Yang's tent. As soon as he went out, Yaoji and Mu Lai's face sank. Mu Lai said in a deep voice, "Marquis Mu Yang will soon suspect us." There weren't many people in the army who had access to confidential information. After eliminating all possibilities, the answer would be the most unlikely one. Yaoji smiled, "You're wrong, he will soon suspect me." Mu Lai's face sank, "You're crazy, don't think of coming out to take the blame. Don't forget, if the evidence is conclusive, do you think Mo Jingli will let me go? Moreover, with Marquis Mu Yang's intelligence, he may suspect my identity." Mu Lai and Mu Yang didn't look alike, only their eyes were a little like Yaoji's. At that time, Marquis Mu Yang would most likely suspect his identity. Yaoji sighed, "Unless it's a last resort, would I go to die? But you must be careful these days, don't pay attention to it unless there's any important news, lest you fall into Marquis Mu Yang's trap." Mu Lai nodded with a solemn expression. "I understand. I have a feeling that this matter will be over soon." Yaoji lowered her eyes and said in a low voice, "It's good that it's over. You've worked hard these past few years." Mu Lai was only 8 or 9 years old when he followed her to the Chu capital. Not only did he have to secretly help her gather information, but he also had to remind her from time to time not to make any mistakes. If it wasn't for Mu Lai's company, she really didn't know if she would have been able to hold on. Mu Lai looked at her and said, "If you can't do what Prince ordered, I'll do it." Yaoji smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry so much. When the time comes, we may not be needed." Mu Lai shook his head and said, "Since the prince has given the order, such a situation will definitely occur. Otherwise, do you think Marquis Mu Yang would be able to survive until now? Just based on the fact that he had almost killed the princess consort and the crown prince, the prince should have killed him back then. Just wait and see. I'm afraid that prince will send news soon." Yaoji was startled. She nodded and said, "Everything is fate. Moreover, I know what to do. I don't owe them anything. Why can't I do it?" Other than Mu Yang being her son's father, Yaoji had gradually become indifferent to him these past few years. Back then, she thought that the feelings of the sea had dried up and the rocks had faded away. Mu Lai looked at her worriedly and nodded. He secretly made up his mind. If it really came to that time, he would make the first move to gain the upper hand, so as to avoid the knot in Yaoji's heart that would be difficult to resolve in the future. On the other side, Yi Li sat on the back of a horse and looked at the place not far from the foot of the mountain. She smiled faintly. Her white clothes and black hair fluttered in the slightly cold breeze. "Princess consort." Qin Feng presented a letter and said in a deep voice, "General Liu has defeated Mu Yang's army of 100,000. The army is heading to the Cold Valley Pass. Shouldn't we go back?" Yi Li frowned. She opened the letter and said, "General Liu's battle was really shocking. But..." Qin Feng immediately let Yaoji and Mu Lai withdraw. Qin Feng was startled, but he quickly calmed down. He said quietly, "Prince has ordered that Yaoji and Mu Lai have other uses." However, Mo Xiaoyao originally didn't intend to tell Yi Li about this matter. But now that Princess Consort wanted Yaoji and Mu Lai to withdraw, it was contrary to Mo Xiaoyao's order. Qin Feng could only tell the truth. Yi Li was startled. She quickly understood Mo Xiaoyao's intention. She sighed softly and said to Qin Feng, "You go. Try to ensure Yaoji and Mu Lai's safety." When Mo Xiaoyao chose Yaoji as a spy in Chujing, Yi Li understood. She didn't stop him then, so she naturally wouldn't stop him now. The Marquis Mu Yang's mansion was doomed. If it could make Mo Xiaoyao feel better, Yi Li didn't mind being more ruthless. Qin Feng nodded and said, "Thank you, Princess Consort." The lives of spies were worthless. Many people in power didn't care about the lives of spies. Because most of the spies had a great deal of information in the hands of their masters. The people in power didn't need to worry about them betraying them. If they were discovered, most of them could only die. Although the Prince Ding mansion treated their subordinates better, they couldn't take care of everyone. But Princess Ding was different. As long as it was possible, she would try her best to ensure the safety of her subordinates. Perhaps it was because of this that these people were willing to serve a woman. Princess Ding not only had the mind and strategy of a man, but also the kindness and generosity that most people in power didn't have. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "I'm just doing my best. I can't protect everyone."
Chapter 969. Late at night, Yaoji was sitting in the tent reading a book. Mu Lai had already fallen asleep. Mu Yang led the troops to intercept LV Jingxian. These few days, because of the matter of the spies, the control of the entire military camp had become very strict. Even the hidden guards of Prince Ding's Fu found it hard to find an opportunity to pass on any information. Yaoji understood that if this continued, it was only a matter of time before the old Marquis Muyang found out her and Mu Lai's identity. After all, they were the ones who shouldn't have appeared in the entire military camp. Unreasonable things were naturally the easiest to arouse suspicion. A cold wind blew at the entrance of the tent. Yaoji raised her head and saw Qin Feng in black standing at the entrance. She was startled and didn't have time to say anything. She grabbed Qin Feng and walked inside. Mu Lai, who was sleeping inside, opened his eyes the moment Qin Feng came in. He turned over and got off the bed. "Godfather, why are you here?" Qin Feng raised his hand and patted Mu Lai's little head. "You are in danger now. I will take you out of here." Yaoji frowned, but Yaoji understood that Qin Feng's arrival might be the princess's idea. But if she couldn't complete the task given by Prince Ding, not only her, but even Mu Lai and Qin Feng would be in trouble. Qin Feng looked at her with understanding. "Go and deal with Mu Yang now. Marquis Muyang will soon suspect you. If you continue to stay here, not only will you be in danger, the shadow guard hidden in the military will also be a threat." Mu Lai nodded and started to pack up his things. In fact, there was nothing to pack. Although they brought a lot of things with Mu Yang, there was almost nothing to take away. Yaoji nodded and frowned worriedly. The entire military camp is under martial law now. How can we get out? Besides, if she and Mu Lai suddenly disappeared from the army, Marquis Muyang would immediately suspect them. Qin Feng smiled faintly. "Since you can come in, you can naturally go out. We have no choice but to leave now. Marquis Muyang will definitely suspect you." Mu Lai pulled Yaoji's hand and said in a deep voice, "Mother, let's go. Once we're done here, we'll be able to return to Glass City." Yaoji was startled, and her expression also changed slightly. That's right, as long as they were done here, they could return to Glass City. Mu Lai no longer needed a child to follow him around all day in fear. He could even see his son. "Let's go." Qin Feng nodded with satisfaction. Soon, there were noises of people shouting to catch the assassin, and they could feel that they were coming over. Qin Feng grabbed Yaoji and pretended to be Mu Yang, who was holding her hostage. He then threw Mu Lai to the Mahist army shadow guard waiting outside the tent. In the eyes of outsiders, it was as if the spies of the Prince Ding mansion had been discovered and were chased here by the Chu army to kidnap Yaoji and her son. After all, Mu Lai was the only grandson of the Marquis Muyang residence. The Chu army did not dare to be too heavy-handed. It was inevitable that their hands and feet were tied. When old Marquis Muyang arrived, Qin Feng and the others had already rushed to the periphery of the Chu army's camp with Yaoji. Old Marquis Muyang deeply understood that ever since the expedition, everything had gone wrong. Mu Yang's crushing defeat to Lu Jingxian made Mo Jingli extremely disappointed in the Marquis Muyang residence. If the spies of the Prince Ding mansion were to escape because of Yaoji and Mu Lai, the Marquis Muyang residence would really be unlucky. Moreover, Marquis Muyang also had some doubts in his heart. How could it be so coincidental that the spies of the Prince Ding mansion would kidnap Yaoji? Seeing this situation, old Marquis Muyang made a prompt decision and shouted sternly, "Catch the assassin at all costs." Grandfather. Mu Lai was held in the arms of the shadow guard and cried out with a sobbing tone. Old Marquis Muyang's heart trembled. In the end, he hardened his heart and said, "Release the arrows." Mu Lai was his only grandson, but when it concerned the survival of the entire Marquis Muyang residence, old Marquis Muyang residence did not hesitate to abandon this grandson. As long as the Marquis Muyang residence was still around, as long as Muyang was still around, naturally, he would still have a grandson in the future. Long arrows shot towards Qin Feng and the others like rain, but at this time, they were already outside the Chu army's camp. Moreover, the people who came with Qin Feng were the elites of the Qi Lin. After a while, everyone disappeared into the night. Old Marquis Muyang residents stared in the direction where the black-clothed men disappeared in a daze for a long time. After so many years together, old Marquis Muyang residents still doted on Mu Lai very much. Although he abandoned him for the sake of the Marquis Muyang residents, it did not mean that he did not feel heartache. Now, he only hoped that the spies of the Prince Ding mansion would not disregard human life and would leave him a way out. Old Marquis, His Majesty summons you. Behind him, the imperial bodyguard hurried over and said in a deep voice. Old Marquis Muyang resident sighed, nodded and turned to head towards Mo Jingli's tent. In the tent, Mo Jingli stared at old Marquis Muyang residents and asked, "Has the spy been caught?" Old Marquis Muyang residents lowered his head and said, "The spy has escaped, please punish me, His Majesty." Mo Jingli's face darkened, but he did not flare up. He only said lightly, "I heard that Marquis Muyang residence's wife and child were taken away by assassins." Old Marquis Muyang residents nodded and said, "Yes, Your Majesty."
Mo Jingli stared coldly at old Marquis Muyang residents and asked, "What does old Marquis Muyang residents think about the spies of the Prince Ding mansion?" Old Marquis Muyang residents was stunned, he did not understand the meaning of Mo Jingli's words. Mo Jingli continued, "What a coincidence. Marquis Muyang residence's military plan was leaked. Tonight, the spies of the Prince Ding mansion happened to kidnap Marquis Muyang residence's wife and child. In addition, if they wanted to kidnap, wouldn't it be more convenient to just take away the little heir? I really don't understand, what's the value of them taking away a concubine who used to be a dancer? Old Marquis, what do you think?" Hearing Mo Jingli's words, old Marquis Muyang residents only felt his heartbeat quicken, his forehead instantly covered in dense cold sweat. The emperor actually suspected that Yaoji was the Prince Ding mansion's spy. If the emperor took it seriously, then Marquis Muyang residents would really be finished. Your Majesty is wise. Marquis Muyang residence is loyal and devoted to the Chu state. With a plop, old Marquis Muyang residence knelt on the ground and said hurriedly. Mo Jingli lightly snorted and said, "Get up. I was just a little curious. You must continue to investigate the Prince Ding mansion's spy. If there are any more leaks of information, I will definitely execute them without mercy." "Yes, this official accepts the order." Old Marquis Muyang residents breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly responded. However, he was shocked and made up his mind to investigate this matter thoroughly. If there really was a problem with that Yaoji, then he would have a plan to deal with it. Just as Mo Jingli's mood was extremely bad, there was an endless stream of even worse news coming in. Early in the morning, Mo Jingli had just gotten up and didn't even have time to eat breakfast when an urgent report came in from outside. Reporting to the emperor, the 4 troops our army arranged in the dark have been attacked one after another by the Mahist army and have suffered heavy losses. What? Mo Jingli, who was just about to eat, accidentally knocked over the soup bowl on the table. He suddenly stood up and said, "Summon all generals for an audience." After receiving the order, all the generals in the Chu army's camp hurriedly rushed over in a short while. Seeing Mo Jingli's expression, everyone knew that something bad had happened. They were afraid that something big had happened. Chapter 970. Mo Jingli wasn't in the mood to pay attention to their thoughts. He threw the urgent report on the ground and said, "Take a look." Old Marquis Muyang, who was standing at the front, bent down to pick it up. His expression immediately changed as he said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid we've really been tricked by Yunting. Princess Ding isn't even in the Mahist army. 2 days ago, they sent someone to investigate and the report they got back was that Princess Ding was in the army. Now that they thought about it, it was probably just Yunting's trick. Princess Ding wasn't even in Cold Valley Pass from the beginning." Yi Li! Yi Li! Mo Jingli gnashed his teeth in anger. "If that's the case, don't blame I for being ruthless." Mo Jingli was so angry that he even forgot to call himself the emperor. "Pass down my order, exterminate Yunting's army immediately." Mo Jingli said sternly. "Yes, Your Majesty." Looking at Mo Jingli's ferocious expression, the generals didn't dare to say more and just accepted the order in a low voice. A guard hurried to Mo Jingli with a letter and presented it with both hands. Mo Jingli opened the letter and glanced at the people below coldly. Finally, his gaze fell on old Marquis Muyang's outstretched hand. He said indifferently, "Marquis Muyang, stay here. The rest of you can leave." Everyone looked at old Marquis Muyang sympathetically and left one after another. Mo Jingli held the letter in his hand and looked at old Marquis Muyang coldly. "Old Marquis Mu, do you know what you wrote in this letter?" Old Marquis Muyang's heart tightened. He knew it was probably related to him. He thought for a while and asked carefully, "Your Majesty, is it about Yaoji and Mu Lai last night?" Old Marquis Muyang felt very complicated. He didn't know if he was worried about Yaoji's relationship with the Prince Ding mansion or Mu Lai's life or death. Mo Jingli sneered, "Senior Marquis Mu, I remember that Yaoji was missing for several years." Old Marquis Muyang nodded, "Yes, Your Majesty." "Do you know where Yaoji was and what she did during those years?" Mo Jingli asked. Old Marquis Muyang's back was drenched in sweat, he dared not answer. Mo Jingli slammed the letter on the desk and said sternly, "Yaoji was in Glass City during those years. And he even opened a tea house. Good job. I trusted the house of Marquis Muyang so much. It turns out that the traitor was right beside me." Old Marquis Muyang's legs turned to jelly as he knelt on the ground. "Your Majesty. Your Majesty is wise. Those were all done by that bitch Yaoji. Marquis Muyang's mansion had nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion. This old minister and Prince Ding have enmity. How could this old minister rely on Prince Ding? Your Majesty, please understand." Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and said, "You can't." "Then what about Muyang? Since ancient times, women have always been a hero's grave. Would Muyang rely on the Prince Ding mansion because of Yaoji? 100,000 men couldn't defeat Lu Jinxian's 5,000 men, and he even came back alive. Old Marquis Muyang, how can I trust you? Many things will be fine if you don't think about it. Once you think about it, a lot of questions will come to your mind and you can't stop them." Mo Jingli was a suspicious person. What's more, the house of Marquis Muyang wasn't loyal to him from the beginning. Since Marquis Muyang could betray Mo Jingqi and pledge loyalty to him, naturally, he could betray him and pledge loyalty to Mo Xiaoyao. Thinking of this, his gaze on old Marquis Muyang became more and more unfriendly. Old Marquis Muyang secretly complained in his heart, but he also understood that no matter how much he tried to explain, Mo Jingli would only think that he was quibbling. In his heart, he just wanted to skin Yaoji and pull out her tendons. He never thought that he would be tricked by his son's woman in the end. "Your Majesty." Old Marquis Muyang opened his mouth and wanted to say something. Mo Jingli didn't want to listen to him anymore. He snorted and said, "Enough. I don't want to listen to you anymore." Old Marquis Muyang quickly shook his head and said, "No. Your Majesty, please listen to me. Yaoji, that bitch, will definitely go to Yang or after leaving the camp. I beg you, Your Majesty." Mo Jingli sneered and said, "I would have forgotten if you didn't mention it." Don't worry, you will be reunited with Muyang soon. Guards, go away. He was grabbed by the guards and dragged out of the tent without any hesitation. Old Marquis Muyang knew that the situation was hopeless. It was useless to say anything more, so he could only shut his mouth. In the camp of the Chu Army's West Army, Muyang was discussing military matters with General Shishi and Lei Tingfeng. A guard came in and reported, "General Mu, there is a child outside who wants to see you." He said he is the heir of the Marquis Muyang's residence. Muyang was slightly startled. He was a little curious why Mu Lai came to find him alone. Lei Tingfeng's eyes flashed and said with a smile, "Brother Mu, you should go and see if anything happened to the heir first." Muyang nodded. Mu Lai's sudden arrival also made him a little worried about what happened. Lei Tingfeng's suggestion was naturally to his liking. He stood up and cupped his hands towards Lei Tingfeng and said, "Thank you, heir." When he left the camp, he saw Mu Lai standing outside in a mess and shivering. It was only the beginning of February, and the north was still chilly. Mu Lai was wearing tattered clothes. Even his lips had turned purple from all the movement. Muyang hurriedly took off his clothes and hugged him. He asked anxiously, "Lai, why are you here alone?" Mu Lai's trembling lips moved and said, "Mother, mother." Before he could say anything, tears flowed out first. Muyang was shocked and hurriedly asked, "What happened to your mother?" Mu Lai looked at Muyang in a daze. Finally, he burst into tears. Seeing him like this, it was obvious that he was frightened. Muyang hugged him tenderly and said softly, "Good child, don't be afraid. Come and tell father, what happened?" Mu Lai leaned into Muyang's arms and said while sobbing, bad people took mother and Lai away. After that, Lai escaped. I wanted to go back and ask grandfather to save mother, but they said grandfather was captured by the emperor. Wah, father, save mother, save grandfather. What? Muyang was taken aback by such a drastic change. He supported Mu Lai and asked, "You said your grandfather was captured by the emperor? Why?" Mu Lai was stunned. He shook his head and said, I don't know. Lai heard it from someone else. Lai didn't dare to go back, so I begged a kind uncle to bring Lai to find father. Mu Lai was young, so his words were also intermittent and disjointed. Muyang couldn't help but panic. Lei Tingfeng, who followed them out, also heard their conversation. He looked thoughtfully at Mu Lai, who was sobbing in Muyang's arms, and said in a low voice, "Brother Mu, don't be anxious. Ask properly first. Besides, the Cold Valley Pass isn't far from here. If something really happened, news should come quickly. Little heir, how did you get here?" The Cold Valley Pass wasn't far from here, but it wasn't near either. No matter what, it was still a distance of 200 miles. How could a child come all the way here alone? Mu Lai sobbed and shook his head in Muyang's arms. He said, "Wah. I don't know. I rode here." Chapter 971. You rode a horse here? Lei Tingfeng raised his eyebrows. Whose horse? Who brought you here? Woo woo. I don't know. Father, save mother. She's lost a lot of blood. Lai is scared. Muyang hurriedly pulled him into his arms and patted him gently. Okay, don't be scared. It's okay now. Lai is good. After bringing Mu Lai into his tent, Muyang carefully questioned him. Only then did he find out what had happened from Mu Lai's mouth. It turned out that 2 days after Muyang left, the Mahist army spies hidden in the army couldn't sit still anymore. They were discovered by the Chu army and took Mu Lai and Yaoji hostage when they escaped. After that, Yaoji tried to help Mu Lai escape. Mu Lai wanted to go back and ask his grandfather to help save his mother, but he heard that the old Marquis Muyang was also captured. That was why he begged a kind passerby to send him here. Mu Yang was already worried when he heard Mu Lai's words. Lei Tingfeng, who was also present, was also much calmer. At the same time, he noticed more details that Mu Yang didn't notice. Lei Tingfeng smiled at Mu Lai and asked, "Little heir, where is the person who sent you here?" Mu Yang heard this and couldn't help but frown. "Brother Lei, what do you mean?" Mu Yang and Lei Tingfeng got along well these days, so Mu Yang didn't want to embarrass Lei Tingfeng. However, Lei Tingfeng's question made him feel a little uncomfortable. Lei Tingfeng smiled. "Brother Mu, there is a war here. Don't you think it's strange that the little heir could meet a passerby riding a horse? Normally, people would stay away from places where there was a war. Why would someone have the leisure to send a child to the military camp on a horse?" Mu Yang looked at Lei Tingfeng angrily. "Brother Lei, are you saying that Lai is lying?" Lei Tingfeng frowned slightly. "Brother Mu, you misunderstood. That's not what I meant. It's just a little strange. The little heir is still young. It's inevitable that he will be used." Mu Yang took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "No matter what, let's find out what's going on first. Brother Lei, I'll have to trouble you with the army for a few days. I have to make a trip back." "No." Mu Lai grabbed Mu Yang's hand tightly and refused to let go. "Father, don't go back. His Majesty will kill you," they said. His Majesty wanted to capture her father and kill him along with her grandfather. Lai didn't want his father to die. Woo woo. Mu Yang's face turned even uglier. He believed most of Mu Lai's words, but he didn't understand why the emperor wanted to capture his father. Just as he was deep in thought, a sharp voice came from outside the door, "The imperial edict has arrived. Marquis Mu Yang, receive the decree." Mu Yang hurriedly settled Mu Lai down and hurriedly left the tent. When he saw the expression of the eunuch beside Imo Jingli standing in the middle of the tent, his heart couldn't help but sink. Your subject, Mu Yang, receives the decree. Mu Yang respectfully knelt down to receive the decree. That eunuch glanced at Mu Yang and opened the bright yellow imperial edict in his hand. He said in a deep voice, "Marquis Mu Yang's residence colluded with the Prince Ding mansion and committed treason. Mu Yang's military power will be removed and he will be escorted back to the camp. Choose a day to deal with him." That eunuch closed the imperial edict and ordered in a sharp voice, "Why aren't you arresting Mu Yang?" "Wait." Mu Yang said in a clear voice, "May I ask eunuch, when did Mu Yang collude with the Prince Ding mansion? When did I commit treason?" That eunuch sneered and said, "You'll have to ask Marquis Mu Yang himself. I'm here on His Majesty's order to arrest him. Don't tell me Marquis Mu Yang wants to defy the edict." Mu Yang gritted his teeth and said, "If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext." Mu Yang is not convinced. The eunuch sneered, "Not convinced? If Marquis Mu Yang has anything to say, just say it in front of His Majesty. I'm here on orders. I hope Marquis Mu Yang will not make things difficult. But I'm afraid Marquis Mu Yang has nothing to say. Old Marquis Mu Yang was beheaded this morning." "What? Father?" Mu Yang's face changed greatly. He didn't expect Mu Lai to say that his father was captured by Imo Jingli and was beheaded so quickly. That eunuch acted as if he didn't see Mu Yang's face change. He said proudly, "Marquis Mu Yang should just obediently surrender. Your father has already confessed that Marquis Mu Yang colluded with the Prince Ding mansion." Mu Yang's face turned green and white. He knew his family's situation better than anyone else. If it was possible, his father naturally wouldn't refuse to seek refuge with the Prince Ding mansion. But the problem was that when his father acted on Imo Jingqi's order to attack Princess Ding, he had already formed a huge enmity with the Prince Ding mansion. Even if he sought refuge with anyone, he would never seek refuge with the Prince Ding mansion. How could his father admit to such a ridiculous crime? Unless it was a confession made under torture. Thinking of this, Mu Yang was indescribably sad and indignant, my Mu family is loyal and devoted to His Majesty, but His Majesty treats human life like grass. How can a loyal official not be bitterly disappointed? That eunuch frowned and waved his hand impatiently. Take down Marquis Muyang so that we can go back and report. The guards on his left and right hurriedly stepped forward to capture Muyang. Although Muyang was young, Marquis Muyang had spent half his life in glory. Moreover, he was also very good at conducting himself. There were also many loyal family generals in the Marquis Muyang mansion. Old Marquis Muyang was inexplicably beheaded by the emperor. How could these people let Muyang be captured? For a moment, the relationship between both sides became tense. By the time General Shibei arrived, most of the people brought by the eunuch had already been killed. Only 2 guards were left and they managed to escape from the barracks. Several li away from the military camp, that eunuch who delivered the decree looked at the people standing not far away with a pale face. His limbs were weak. The last 2 guards beside him also collapsed in front of him. That eunuch was also very good at reading people's expressions. He hurriedly stepped forward and said with a flattering smile, "Commander Qin, this lowly one did as you said. That Muyang was so daring that he actually killed the guards sent by His Majesty. Commander Qin, please spare this lowly one's life." Qin Feng looked back at the flattering eunuch in front of him and said with a smile, "You don't have to worry. I won't kill you." That eunuch was stunned, but his heart was overjoyed. He originally thought that delivering the decree would be a simple task. He didn't expect that he would be captured by the people from the Prince Ding mansion before he even set off. In the end, he could only deceive Muyang according to Qin Feng's words. Old Marquis Muyang was killed. He even almost became a ghost under Muyang's blade. Now that he finally got his life back, he was naturally overjoyed. "Not only will I not kill you, I will also send someone to send you back safely. Do you know what to say when you go back? This lowly one understands, this lowly one understands." Muyang dared to defy the decree and even killed the emperor's envoy. He intended to rebel. That eunuch quickly said. Qin Feng nodded with satisfaction, "Very good. I like to deal with smart people." Chapter 972. Muyang's face turned even uglier as he watched the eunuch who delivered the decree leave in a sorry state. His father's unjust death, Yaoji's disappearance, and Imo Jingli's suspicions were all like a mountain pressing down on Muyang's head. Muyang's face turned ashen as he looked at the corpses of the imperial guards all over the ground. The general of the western region, Zhao Lian, had some friendship with the old Marquis Muyang. When he heard the news and rushed over, the situation in front of him was already out of control. However, although he had a friendship with the old Marquis Muyang, it wasn't deep enough for him to gamble his family's name for this friendship. He could only order someone to put Muyang under house arrest in the army and personally write a letter to have it sent to Imo Jingli's hands on a horse. Unfortunately, he didn't know that his memorial had turned into a pile of ashes less than 20 li away from the army camp. Zhao Lian and Lei Tingfeng were both sitting in Muyang's tent. They couldn't help but sigh as they watched Muyang hugging the sleeping Mu Lai. To be honest, neither Zhao Lian nor Lei Tingfeng believed that the Marquis Muyang's residents would seek refuge with the Prince Ding mansion. It wasn't that they didn't want to, but that they couldn't. Lei Tingfeng felt that something was wrong, but the old Marquis Muyang was dead. He was afraid that Muyang. Thinking of this, Lei Tingfeng secretly gave Zhao Lian a look. Zhao Lian sighed helplessly in his heart. He was considered a veteran of the Dechu state. Although he hadn't fought any earth-shattering battles in his life, he could be said to be experienced and knowledgeable. Originally, Imo Jingli's decision to go to the north had caused many people to secretly mutter in their hearts. Now that the war had just begun, the emperor had already executed one of his important subordinates. This caused many people to feel uneasy. The soldiers who were close to the Marquis Muyang's residence were even more indignant. If Muyang had any other intentions, the army would be in chaos. Originally, for the sake of the stability of the army, Zhao Lian should have made a prompt decision to arrest Mu Yang. However, half of the generals in his camp were either Marquis Muyang's former subordinates or had an old relationship with Marquis Muyang's mansion. Not to mention the emperor, even Zhao Lian himself was occasionally secretly worried in his heart. Could it be that Marquis Muyang's household really had some ulterior motives? Marquis Muyang. After thinking about it, Zhao Lian decided to persuade him first. With Lu Jinxian's army at the border, the army could not afford to fall into chaos. Mu Yang smiled bitterly. General Zhao is too polite. Am I still some Marquis Muyang? Zhao Lian sighed and said, there must be some misunderstanding. This old man has personally written a report to explain to the emperor. General, please don't be impatient. Even if there was some misunderstanding, Mo Jingli shouldn't have killed my father. Mu Yang said sternly, a trace of shocking hatred flashing through his eyes. Zhao Lian was secretly shocked. This time, no matter what, the house of Marquis Muyang would be at odds with the emperor. Mother. In Mu Yang's arms, Mu Lai let out a small sob in his sleep. Mu Yang's heart ached even more. He picked up Mu Lai and got up to walk out. Mu Yang, where are you going? Zhao Lian quickly asked. Mu Yang turned back and said in a low voice, I'm going to save Yaoji. In this situation, how could Zhao Lian dare to let him lead the troops away? He quickly said, how do you know where Madame Mu is now? Let's send someone to investigate first. Besides, you should know that once you leave. If Mu Yang really left like this, he would become a traitor even if he didn't. Mu Yang sneered and said, it's already like this. Do I still care about these things? Zhao Lian gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, fine, I won't stop you if you want to leave. But you can't take the troops away. If Mu Yang took the troops away, his life wouldn't be far away. Mu Yang sneered. If he left alone, he wouldn't be able to do anything. As long as Mo Jingli sent someone to hunt him down, they would be able to kill him, not to mention saving people. At the side, Lei Tingfeng frowned and said, Marquis Muyang, don't be impatient. Don't you think this matter is a little strange? Mu Yang and Zhao Lian looked at Lei Tingfeng at the same time. Lei Tingfeng said in a low voice, Emperor Chu isn't a fool. If he really wanted to kill Marquis Muyang, why would he spread the news of the old Marquis Muyang's death so quickly and only send a dozen guards to deliver the decree? Isn't he afraid that Marquis Muyang will disobey the decree and even rebel on the spot? Mu Yang looked at Lei Tingfeng and said coldly, does Genom of Gojoseon mean that my father is fine? Or is the person who delivered the decree not Mo Jingli's men but someone else in disguise? Lei Tingfeng was speechless. They also knew the people around Mo Jingli. If it was a disguise, it was impossible to be flawless in front of so many people. They had even seen those dead imperial guards in Mo Jingli's army before. How could it be a fake? After a long time, Lei Tingfeng sighed and said, Brother Mu, if you believe me, wait for another day. Let us figure out the news from the camp first. At that time, if it's true, I will personally escort Brother Mu out of the camp. If Emperor Chu blames me, I will also bear the responsibility. It will also save General Zhao a lot of trouble. Zhao Lian naturally agreed when he heard this. No matter what, it was most important to stabilize Mu Yang first. Otherwise, there would be a mutiny in the army soon. He nodded and said, Lei is right. Nephew, if it's true, this old man won't stop you. Mu Yang was silent for a moment. Finally, he nodded and said, all right, let's wait for another day. In the Chu army's camp, Mo Jingli gloomily stared at the trembling eunuch kneeling before him. He said in a deep voice, what did you say? The eunuch who delivered the decree had a pale face. He said in a trembling voice, Your Majesty, please spare my life. Your Majesty, please spare my life, this servant is incompetent. Marquis Muyang refused to accept the decree and even said, Marquis Muyang's household is loyal and devoted to the Dechu state. Your Majesty is muddle-headed and harmed the loyal. He killed all the imperial guards sent by your Majesty. Fortunately, General Shishi arrived in time and saved the servant's life. While speaking, the eunuch was already sobbing. He had a frightened and timid appearance. Mo Jingli stared at him for a long time. He saw that the eunuch's clean clothes were stained with blood and dust. His expression was also full of exhaustion and fear, as well as pain. It was obvious that he had also suffered some injuries. Good Marquis Muyang, good Muyang. Bring Mu Jingming here for me. Mu Jingming was old Marquis Muyang's real name. However, he was conferred the title of Marquis Muyang when he was young. Therefore, there were very few people who called him by his real name. Not long after, old Marquis Muyang was escorted into the tent by the imperial guards. It had only been 2 days, but old Marquis Muyang, who was originally full of energy, had aged a lot. His originally white hair was a little messy and his pair of sharp eyes had also become a little dim. Life in prison naturally wouldn't be that good. He looked old and powerless. Mu Jingming, what else do you have to say? Mo Jingli asked sternly. Old Marquis Muyang was startled. He didn't understand what had happened to make Mo Jingli so angry. Then, he glanced at the eunuch who was kneeling in a sorry state. Old Marquis Muyang's heart shook and he seemed to have understood something. This servant has been wronged. Your Majesty, please investigate. Although he had already guessed what had happened, old Marquis Muyang couldn't admit it. He could only play dumb. Mo Jingli sneered, investigate? You said that Muyang didn't have any rebellious thoughts? But he dared to kill the imperial guards that I sent to deliver the imperial edict. He dared to scold me for being muddle-headed. Is this what you meant by Marquis Muyang's residents being loyal and devoted to the Chu state? Chapter 973. Your Majesty, this must be a misunderstanding. My son would never be so rude. Old Marquis Muyang said anxiously. He knew Muyang's character, he would never act so impulsively. Moreover, he was still in the Chu army's camp. Even if Muyang was afraid of breaking the vases, he would never rashly kill the person the emperor sent to deliver the decree. The eunuch kneeling at the side had a thought and screamed, Old Marquis Mu, are you saying that we are lying to the emperor? Are we framing Marquis Muyang? Your Majesty, this servant has been wronged. Please send someone you trust to investigate, so this servant will not be wronged. Thousands of soldiers witnessed Marquis Muyang killing the guard sent by your Majesty. This servant does not believe that Marquis Muyang can shut so many people's mouths. Moreover, although General Shilu only arrived after the incident, Heir Genom of Gojoseon was present from the beginning to the end. Your Majesty, please investigate. Seeing the eunuch's grief and indignation, Mo Jingli believed him even more. Moreover, he had already suspected the house of Marquis Muyang. The people below were only adding fuel to the fire. With a sneer, Mo Jingli said, of course I will investigate. Gao Ming. Bring my decree and tell General Shilu Zhaolian to bring Muyang to me. If he disobeys, execute him on the spot. A general stepped out and cupped his hands. This general obeys. This general will definitely bring Muyang back to beg for forgiveness. Mo Jingli snorted. He was not interested in whether Muyang would beg for forgiveness or not. He was only worried that Muyang would bring the hundreds of thousands of soldiers under him for breakfast. After all, the Mu family still had some influence in the Dechu state's army. After thinking for a while, Mo Jingli said, I will give you another 50,000 elite soldiers to assist General Shilu in defending against Lu Jinxian's troops. Yes, thank you, Your Majesty. Gao Ming thanked him loudly. Of course, he understood Mo Jingli's meaning. These 50,000 elite soldiers were not really for him to defend against Lu Jinxian. If Muyang had any strange movements, he would be able to join forces with General Shilu to suppress him. Old Marquis Muyang looked at the tall and upright Gao Ming, who seemed to be full of righteousness, and felt a sense of despair in his heart. It was impossible for anyone to only have friends and not have enemies. Coincidentally, Gao Ming and the Mu family had always been at odds. The Mu family was a family of generals. Gao Ming and Mu Yang were close in age, but Mu Yang's family background was far from what Gao Ming, who came from a humble background, could compare with. Therefore, even though Gao Ming had followed Mo Jingli since he was still a prince with no real power, after Mo Jingli ascended the throne, his status was still far inferior to Mo Jingli. It could be said that the entire Chu army knew that the two of them were not on good terms. Mo Jingli sent him over. Although he might have been worried that Mu Yang would be merciful because of his good relationship with him. However, sending Gao Ming was equivalent to cutting off the house of Marquis Muyang. Old Marquis Muyang fell to the ground dejectedly. Mo Jingli didn't even bother to look at him and left in a huff. The eunuch who had been kneeling at the side hurriedly got up and ordered people to bring old Marquis Muyang back to the prison to be closely guarded. Old Marquis Muyang glared fiercely at the eunuch. He keenly felt that there must be something wrong. However, he was currently imprisoned by Mo Jingli. Even if he wanted to investigate the truth, he couldn't do anything. That eunuch looked around to make sure there was no one around. Suddenly, he approached old Marquis Muyang and laughed softly. He lowered his voice and said, "Old Marquis, don't blame me. Who told you to offend someone you shouldn't? It really is you." Old Marquis Muyang scolded harshly. "What are you still standing there for? Why aren't you taking him away and guarding him properly? If the Prince Ding Mansion rescues him, none of us will be able to live." That eunuch waved his hand and said sharply. Old Marquis Muyang was dragged out without any resistance. A day later, the news that came made everyone feel very helpless. Reporting to the great general, the emperor ordered General Gao Ming to lead 50,000 elite troops to assist the great general. The tent was instantly filled with a heavy atmosphere. The general of the Marquis Muyang's expression was extremely ugly. Muyang sneered, 50,000 elite troops to assist General Zhao? His words were full of mockery. Everyone present understood what he meant by help. What could 50,000 men do? Right now, there were more than 100,000 soldiers of the Western Army in the camp. Muyang had 100,000 soldiers and Lei Tingfeng had more than 100,000 soldiers. The total military strength was more than 400,000. The military strength was already twice that of Lu Jingxian. Right now, these 50,000 soldiers were probably not used to deal with Lu Jingxian. They were used to guard against Muyang. Zhao Lian let out a long sigh and asked, "Where is General Gao?" The soldier reported, "General Gao's army is already 30 li away." In addition, General Gao sent an order. Marquis Muyang intends to rebel. General, please take him down immediately. When General Gao arrives, he can be escorted back to the camp for the emperor to deal with. As soon as the words came out, the generals of the Marquis Muyang's residence all stood up and stared at everyone with an unfriendly expression. Just when Zhao Lian was in a dilemma, the sound of war drums came from outside the camp. Zhao Lian was shocked. He quickly made a decision and said in a deep voice, "The Mahist army is calling for a fight. Generals, follow this general out of the camp to meet them." After that, he walked out directly without caring about Muyang and the others. Lei Tingfeng stood up and looked at Muyang who was standing on the side. He sighed and shook his head and followed out. In the tent, the remaining generals of the Marquis Muyang's residence asked in a low voice, "Marquis, we..." Muyang closed his eyes and said decisively, "Those who are willing to stay, follow General Zhao out of the camp to meet them. Those who are willing to follow me, we will leave now." Among the people present, a few silently left and followed Zhao Lian out. The rest were all willing to follow Muyang. Although their choices were different, no one was in the mood to despise anyone at this time. It was not an easy path to follow Muyang. The Marquis Muyang's residence was not as powerful as the Prince Ding Mansion. It was not like you could become a king just because you brought an army with you. Those who were willing to follow Muyang could be said to be the confidants of the Marquis Muyang's residence. If not, they were the saviors of the Marquis Muyang's residence. Muyang glanced at the crowd and said in a deep voice, "Muyang thanks everyone. Go back and gather your troops. We will leave immediately." Therefore, outside the camp, two groups of troops left the camp one after the other, but they went to different places. When Muyang came, he brought 100,000 troops with him. However, only 30,000 to 40,000 people followed him. Looking at the direction Muyang left with his troops, Zhao Lian sighed slightly. There was a hint of regret in his somewhat bleak eyes. Muyang probably wouldn't be able to go far in the future. Originally, if he was given time, Muyang would become a general not inferior to his father. But now, Muyang only had 30 to 40,000 men. He had neither rations nor reinforcements. It could be said that his future was already sealed. Lei Tingfeng stood beside Zhao Lian and asked faintly, "General Zhao, won't you regret letting him go just like that?" Zhao Lian sighed and said, "This old man has done his best. It's better than a mutiny." Lei Tingfeng nodded in agreement. Letting Muyang take 30,000 to 40,000 people away would not be a big hindrance to the army. However, if Muyang was really captured or killed, the generals who were originally on good terms with the Marquis Muyang's residents would inevitably feel sympathy. At that time, if they were instigated by someone with ulterior motives, the loss would not be limited to these 30,000 to 40,000 people. Chapter 974. However, how are you going to explain this to Emperor Chu? Mo Jingli was not a magnanimous person who cared about the big picture. He probably wouldn't be able to see Zhao Lian retreat for the sake of the army's safety. He would only see Zhao Lian disobeying the decree and letting Muyang go. Zhao Lian smiled bitterly and said, "This old man will do his best. Moreover, I might die on the battlefield at any time. What's the point of thinking so much?" To be honest, this old man really doesn't have much confidence in dealing with Lu Jingxian. Seeing how the Marquis Muyang was dealt with, Zhao Lian's heart was not completely unaffected. However, as a subject, if the emperor wants the subject to die, the subject must die. General is righteous. Lei Tingfeng praised sincerely. On the other hand, Muyang had only left the camp for 4 hours before he met with Gao Ming's army. Originally, the two armies would not meet so quickly. However, when Gao Ming was about to reach the camp, he received news that Muyang had already escaped with his army. He immediately turned his troops around and chased after them. At the same time, he quickly sent a letter to Mo Jingli's camp, stating that Muyang had already led his army to betray him. He even did not forget to complain about Zhao Lian. Gao Ming always felt that he had worked so hard for Mo Jingli all these years. However, he was always suppressed by these generals from large families. Now that he had the opportunity, how could he let it go? When the two armies met, Gao Ming immediately gave the order to charge forward. Amidst the chaos, there were countless casualties. Just as Gao Ming was feeling pleased with himself, he saw a group of black soldiers charging out from the side and surrounding the two armies that were fighting. Gao Ming saw the black flag fluttering in the wind and was so scared that he almost fell off his horse. He shouted in fear, "Mahist army! Black Cloud Cavalry!" Muyang's face also darkened. He vaguely felt that something was wrong. The Black Cloud Cavalry's strength was naturally not something that these normal Chu army soldiers could compare to. After a series of rampage, the Chu army's formation was immediately shattered. The leading black-clothed man said in a deep voice, "If you are willing to submit to the Prince Ding mansion, then stop immediately." The black-clothed man's voice carried a deep internal energy that spread in all directions. These soldiers were already dizzy from the sudden infighting. Now, they were frightened by the Black Cloud Cavalry. Originally, these soldiers did not have any ill feelings towards the Mahist army. They even had some fear and dissatisfaction towards the battle with the Prince Ding mansion. At this time, under the lead of someone, many people quickly put down their weapons and left. Soon, many peoples to put down their weapons. And even protect them from the swords and swords. To protect them, to protect, to protect, to protect. In less than half an hour, the entire battlefield had quieted down. The number of soldiers who chose to throw down their weapons and surrender to Prince Sting's residence was as high as tens of thousands. Both Mu Yang's and Gao Ming's men were present. Mu Yang was still protected by a few loyal guards as he continued to resist the Mahist army. Gao Ming had already fallen into the hands of the Mahist army. The black-clothed general carried Gao Ming forward and said in a deep voice, "Stand down." The Black Cloud cavalry soldiers that were originally surrounding Mu Yang immediately stopped and respectfully moved to the side. Mu Yang stared at the black-clothed man in front of him for a while. He finally said with a frown, "You are Qin Feng." Mu Yang and Qin Feng had only met a few times. However, Mu Yang still remembered the silent man who was said to be the commander of the Prince Sting Mansion's most mysterious Qilin. Qin Feng nodded his head without a care. He casually threw Gao Ming at Mu Yang's feet. Gao Ming stood up with a dispirited expression. He looked at Qin Feng with some fear. He only felt that he was very unlucky. He had always been suppressed by Mu Yang. Now that Mu Yang was about to be unlucky, he was sent by the emperor to capture Mu Yang. However, he still ended up being captured by the Mahist army along with Mu Yang. At this moment, Gao Ming truly felt that Mu Yang was his nemesis. "You, the traitor of the Prince Sting Mansion. How dare you? This general is a general of the Dechu state." Gao Ming looked at Qin Feng, who didn't care about him at all. He roared fiercely. The general beside Qin Feng twitched his mouth. He couldn't help but lower his head and cough lightly. "Commander Qin, is there something wrong with this guy? Was the status of a general of the Dechu state something to be proud of? Especially now that the two armies were fighting against each other, and they had already become prisoners." Qin Feng raised his eyebrows and smiled. "So what if he's a general of the Dechu state? Now that the two armies are facing each other, wouldn't the more generals of the Dechu state that I killed, the greater the merit?" Hearing this, Gao Ming's face instantly paled. He didn't dare to say anything else. Mu Yang stared at Qin Feng and frowned. "Princess Ding's methods are good?" It seems that Princess Ding had already predicted that this one and General Gao would meet here. "Please ask Princess Ding to come out and meet me," Qin Feng said indifferently. "The princess consort isn't here right now. I'm afraid that Marquis Mu Yang won't be able to do as he wishes." Mu Yang frowned. "I wonder if my humble wife was taken away by Commander Qin's men. She's just an innocent girl. As a general, Commander Qin probably wouldn't make things difficult for a weak girl who doesn't know anything." "Doesn't know anything?" Qin Feng's expression was a bit strange. Mu Yang nodded. "That's right. This one was defeated by Commander Qin. Even if I die, I have no regrets. However, my humble wife and servant have nothing to do with this matter. Please be magnanimous and let them go." Qin Feng looked at Mu Yang and shook his head, saying indifferently, "What a pity." Actually, Mu Yang himself wasn't a hateful person. If Marquis Mu Yang's mansion didn't offend Prince Sting, he wouldn't be so unlucky. Even at this point, he still didn't forget to plead for Yaoji. He could be considered loyal. Unfortunately, they all served their own masters and stood on different sides. However, Mu Yang had to die. "Commander Qin." Mu Yang's expression changed slightly. Qin Feng said casually, "Of course I won't hurt Yaoji and Mu Lai." "Because..." Mu Yang stared at Qin Feng, not knowing what he wanted to say. Suddenly, he felt a cold pain in his abdomen. He looked down in astonishment and saw Mu Lai's big smiling eyes in his arms. There was actually an obedient and innocent smile. Mu Lai said with a grin, "Because I'm a member of the Prince Sting Mansion." Chapter 975. This sudden turn of events stunned everyone. While Mu Yang was in a daze, Mu Lai, who was originally sitting in his arms, flew up and pounced towards Qin Feng. But because everyone was shocked by this sudden change, none of the guards beside Mu Yang actually stopped him, allowing him to fall to Qin Feng's side. After being father and son for a few years, Mu Yang realized that he didn't understand his son at all. At least, he didn't know that he had such good qinggong. Mu Lai stood beside Qin Feng and smiled as he waved the dagger in his hand. "Godfather, how is it?" Qin Feng patted Mu Lai's head with praise, causing Mu Lai to smile happily. Qin Feng's praise wasn't just the praise of a father to his son, but more importantly, it was the praise of a Qilin commander to a future member. Mu Lai, who had made it his life's goal to become the youngest official member of Qilin, was naturally very happy. Mu Yang painfully covered his abdomen, which was bleeding profusely, and bent over on the horse's back. He looked in disbelief at his son, who was very familiar yet strangely unfamiliar. "Lai, you," Mu Lai looked at Mu Yang and sighed helplessly. He said faintly, "Do you still not understand? I'm not your son." "What?" Mu Yang shook his head absent-mindedly. He felt that everything in front of him was ridiculous. He even thought that he was hallucinating because he was too tired these days. After a while, he looked up at Mu Lai and said, "You're not Lai, then who are you? What did you do to Lai?" Mu Lai said, "I am Mu Lai, but your son's name isn't Mu Lai. Back then, you didn't even ask what Yaoji named the child." Mu Yang couldn't hold on any longer and finally fell from the horse's back. The guards beside him quickly supported him and glared angrily at Mu Lai, who was beside Qin Feng. Mu Lai shrugged innocently. Seeing Mu Yang's pale face due to pain and shock, Mu Lai couldn't bear it. Speaking of which, Mu Yang really didn't treat him badly all these years. Although he was secretly harmed by his wife a few times, who didn't have some shameful private matters in a noble family. Unfortunately, the house of Marquis Muyang had offended someone they shouldn't have. Back when they arrived in Chu capital, Prince Ding had already decided the end for the house of Marquis Muyang. The peaceful days of the past few years had already been earned. You're from Prince Ding Mansion." Muyang gritted his teeth and asked, "Where is my son?" "Mu Lai's Marquis Muyang's Marquis house of Marquis Muyang's Marquis. Could it be that Ding Wangfu is unwilling to let go of a newborn baby?" Thinking of this possibility, Mu Yang's heart could not help but tremble. Perhaps his son was long dead, and the one he doted on all these years was just a spy planted by Princess Ding in the house of Marquis? "If it wasn't me who stayed in the house of Marquis all these years, your son would have been killed by your wife." Mu Lai curled his lips and said discontentedly. If it was really Yaoji and a child who didn't know anything who returned to the house of Marquis, that child would have died many times over. Mu Lai was a little resentful towards Mu Yang's accusation. Mu Yang was stunned for a long time, then he suddenly laughed out loud. Looking at Mu Lai, he said, "Were you the one who leaked the defense and secrets of the battle with Lu Jingxian? The Prince Ding mansion is really something, even a child can." Mu Lai pursed his lips and smiled, but didn't answer him. The excessive blood loss made Mu Yang a little dizzy. Perhaps he also understood that he couldn't escape today, so he didn't force himself. Waving his hand, he broke free from his subordinate's support and let himself fall to the ground. After resting for a moment, Mu Yang opened his eyes and asked, "How is Yaoji? Even if you're not her son, she's been good to you these years." "You can't even." Mu Lai was a little embarrassed and didn't speak. In fact, he originally hoped that Mu Yang wouldn't ask this question. It would be less painful if he didn't know anything. It would also save Yaoji from dealing with the current situation. He didn't expect Mu Yang to still ask. Mu Lai looked up at Qin Feng, and Qin Feng looked at Mu Yang indifferently. A clear female voice came from behind the crowd, "Let me say it." The Mahist army stepped aside, and Yaoji strolled out from behind, looking at them indifferently. Mu Yang looked at Yaoji in front of him. She was dressed in white, and the white fox cloak made her look even fairer and more delicate. She was different from her usual glamorous self. Although she didn't wear the luxurious clothes of the House of Marquis, she looked more peaceful and elegant. Obviously, she didn't suffer much these days. Looking at the woman in front of him, Muyang finally squeezed out a bitter smile. Seeing the situation in front of him, what else didn't he understand? Why? Yaoji. Cough, cough, why did you do this? Muyang looked at the woman in front of him in pain, as if Yaoji's appearance was more painful than the stab Mu Lai gave him just now. Yaoji looked at him indifferently and said, "Do you still remember the letter I left behind when I fled with the child?" Muyang was a little dazed. After a while, he remembered and nodded, "I remember. You said that you didn't want to see me or anyone from the house of Marquis Muyang again. But later, you came back with I thought." Yaoji's smile was a little bitter, "You never took my words seriously. I've understood it ever since I brought back to this world. You still don't understand. I brought back not because I thought it through, but because I am a spy of the Prince Ding mansion. You should have been on guard against me from the day I came back." Yaoji always believed that Muyang loved her very much. But Muyang never listened to her seriously, so Muyang never suspected her intention of suddenly bringing the child to the house of Marquis Muyang. He just thought that she had suffered enough outside with the child and naturally came back. You hate me so much?" Muyang said miserably. Yaoji shook her head, "No, I don't hate you. I just don't love you anymore. The Prince Ding mansion and princess consort saved me and my child. Muyang, I just want my child to be safe and happy in this world. Even if I have to sacrifice you." Muyang spat out a mouthful of blood. Muyang raised his hand to stop the guard who wanted to help him up. He shook his head and smiled bitterly, "Yaoji. I never thought that the house of Marquis Muyang would be destroyed by you." Looking at the clear dark clouds in the sky, Muyang's eyes were distant and empty. He still remembered when he was a high-spirited teenager, riding a horse on a slanted bridge and dancing with red sleeves. When he rode past the Qingqing lane, he happened to see a beautiful woman with light makeup sitting lazily by the window, looking tired. From then on, he fell into the endless soft red and couldn't get up. But now, this woman was dressed in white and looked cold. She was no longer the beautiful dancer in the Qingqing lane who could dance in the capital. As for him, he was no longer the romantic and elegant young man he used to be. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.